Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
In today's story, we have Ted who gets betrayed by his wife Kathy, for who chose OnlyFans over her marriage and then tried to destroy Ted in court. If you like our stories, please comment and please hit the subscribe button for more tales. My name is Ted. I'm 48 years old and 2 years ago I got divorced from Kathy who was married to me for over 10 years. Well, it has been a few years and you must be wondering why did I come here after such a long time. A few days back I saw a video on YouTube where Joe Smith is in an argument with his wife about her joining OnlyFans. So, we have Joe Smith, former NBA player. He was the first at the 1995 NBA draft. Did not have a great career, but it was okay. He moved from one team to the other. I guess it was 12 different times. He was a journeyman. He married Kisha Chavis. She went by her screen name Kiss Major, aka Yasmin Pendavis. Don't ask me how I know the details. You can say I have seen her perform few years ago. I have seen her almost 50 times with different movies. That is for Joe Smith. He will deal with her wife, I hope. Why are we discussing him again? His viral incident has brought some painful memories from my marriage. I married Kathy after dating her for 2 years. I used to work as a cameraman and at a studio that was making not-so-noble movies. You see, I was a student and needed money to finish my graduation. Kathy had joined our team as a makeup artist. Her job was to ensure that women looked good. The moment I saw her, I was smitten. She was petite and was beautiful. I was not sure why she was here. Once the day was over, I walked up to her and asked her name and started a conversation. Walking up to her became a daily activity. We became good friends and soon I asked her out on a date. One date became 2, and later we were in love. I soon left my job as a cameraman and I was now working in a bank. I was making good money. I asked to leave her job and move in with me. She agreed and 2 years later we got married. I was making good money, but I had to work hard. Kathy was taking care of the house. I used to ensure that all her desires are fulfilled. She was wearing good clothes, good shoes, eat at nice restaurants, go on a vacation twice in a year. Living the American life. We did not have kids yet. It sounds like a simple story, right? Like all the stories that I read or listen online, mine was about to go haywire. I had a small accident, and it wrecked my knee. I was to stay at home for the next 2 months. During this time, since I was not able to go out, Kathy was not very happy as her outings had stopped. To make sure that she was happy, I let her go out with her friends. She did have a friend circle back from her days as a makeup artist. She used to go out with them at some days. I did not pay a lot of attention to it. So, for the next 2 months while I was trying to recover, Kathy enjoyed and partied with her girls. She had started her own Instagram page and used to show off her skills as a makeup artist with other models. I did not mind as she was making some money and was not bored with her life. For the next few months, I recovered and Kathy was getting popular. One fine day, Kathy came home fuming and threw her bag on the bed near me. I asked what happened. She did not say anything. She came over me and made wild love to me. Once we were done and laying there, I asked her what came over her today. She said that she had a fight with a former corn actor Candy. I asked what happened, to which she told me that Candy berated Kathy, that she is now a housewife with no future and no money. She told Kathy that she can have any man that she wants and has a ton of money. She also boasted of her numerous awards and said that Kathy could have been famous and successful had she not been married. I heard Kathy and then asked, what is the parameter of success? How do you define success? Is getting pumped in front of multiple people success? Being able to have any man drill you as success, or being married to a loyal man success? As far as money is concerned, we have enough for us to live our lives happily and give our kids a better future. Yes, you could have been famous and could have been a big makeup artist, but today you are my wife. Candy is alone and will remain alone for rest of her life. Kathy heard all that I said and later fell asleep in my arms. For the next few days, Kathy continued to be gloomy and I had started to go to my office again. I started to put more hours at work during the weekdays to ensure that I can give more to my wife, both in terms of gifts and my time on weekends. Kathy continued with her Instagram gig and things looked fine. A few days later, Kathy told me that she has to go to Miami, Florida, as she has to attend a shoot for Candy. I was surprised. I asked, is that the same woman you had a fight with? She said yes and told me that Candy apologized and we have reconciled. I asked, what is this shoot for? She told me that Candy has joined OnlyFans and wants me to make her look good. I was not very pleased and told her that I don't think this is a great idea. She told me that they are paying good money. I told her you don't need money as we have plenty. She said that this is a big gig and she can make a name for herself. I asked if I can come with her. Her reaction was a bit concerning. She said that what will you do there? Watch Candy take her clothes off. That triggered me off and I said I have seen her already. Remember, I was the cameraman? And I don't want to see any of her again. I stormed off the room. Although I was not very happy, I let her go to Miami. Kathy went to Miami, and 2 weeks later she came back all tanned and tired. I picked her from the airport, and throughout the way she did not speak a lot, and just closed her eyes and laid back. I could see that she is tired, and once I reached home, I asked her to lay in the bed. I filled the bathtub with lukewarm water and put some salts in it and asked her to lay in the water for some time. Kathy went in the bath, and after about 45 minutes later came out in her bathrobe. Once she took her robe off, I saw something strange. When we get tanned, we get tan only on the parts of the body that is exposed to the sun, and parts that are hidden shine different. I could see no such tan lines on Kathy's body. So, the sun was shining all over her. I asked her about the same, and she said that her tan lines are a result of her being in a chlorine-filled pool and not being under the sun. Water enters your clothes, you see. I argued that her reason is stupid and makes no sense. She then screamed that she is tired and just wants to rest. I was fuming and left the room. For the first time that day since being married, I did not sleep on my bed. I did not talk to her that night and went out for a local bar, and later came home drunk and slept on the couch. I went to the office early in the morning and decided that I'll go home late. Kathy called me twice, but I did not answer. I went home later and saw Kathy waiting for me over the dinner table. I told her that I am not hungry and went to change my clothes. I slept in the guest room again, and Kathy came to me twice during the night, but I shouted back twice at her. Next morning, I decided to tone down and did speak to Kathy. I told her that I am not going to believe her excuses and want her to come clean. She explained that she was at an all-women resort and everyone was without clothes. So, she just joined in. She said that she lied as she knew I would be angry. I did not say a lot, but I told her that I am not happy with what she has done. No decent person would be walking around a resort naked. So what she has done is something I do not appreciate. The fact that the naked person here happens to be my wife. Our argument had toned down and planned to take my wife out for dinner that evening. Fate had other plans. I reached office and started my work. At lunch break, one of the new guys was with his buddies and they were discussing about social media, and I happened to overhear the name Candy. I moved closer and casually joined them in the discussion. One of them then showed his phone, which had a picture of Candy. He had an OnlyFans account and had paid to see Candy. He then moved some more pictures, and in one of the pictures there were 2 naked women. One of them was Kathy. I was shocked and embarrassed. I quickly left the office and quickly drove off. I kept driving till I did not know where I was. I picked my phone and installed OnlyFans app and started searching for Candy. I found her, and then proceeded to pay for her exclusive pictures. There I found Kathy, and in the comments, I found her account. So, I paid for her exclusive pictures and found her pictures at the same location as Candy. So, she was not just making others look good, she was shining herself in front of the camera. I also found a picture where she had advertised other services as well, which included SMS and calls, and even video calls. I was disgusted and beyond my realm of senses. I did not go home that day and decided to walk into a motel. I stayed there that night and called my office that I will not be available for the next whole week. Since I was a good employee, I was given my leave. I went to a friend of mine, who happens to be a lawyer. I explained to him what has happened, and he said that he can get me a divorce. However, I might end up losing a lot of money in settlements. I explained that I have worked hard to build a nice world for me and my wife. That world has been destroyed. I told him that my trust has been shattered and I am not willing to live with Kathy anymore and would be fine to pay whatever is needed to get her out of my life. Before I left his office, my lawyer asked me to hire a private investigator, just for good measure. He also suggested me to go back to my house and pretend normal, just to so Kathy throws caution to the wind. I went back to my home and was greeted by Kathy. I smiled and told her to get ready and took her out for dinner. She seemed happy and we went out for dinner. I told her that would be leaving for a work-related trip to Chicago and will be out for 3 days. I left my house the next morning and went to the local motel. The private investigator had already been hired and he had started working. I waited for the PI to do his job. 2 days later, the PI met me at the motel. He came with a big smile. He then proceeded to open his laptop and started explaining. He told me that Kathy has frequently been spotted with Candy and her manager. He explained that Kathy was working as a makeup artist with Candy and later joined her in her OnlyFans shoot in Miami. I told the PI that I know all of that. What is new? He then informed that Candy's manager is drilling both Kathy and Candy. He then brought up 2 video clips from last 2 days where Kathy was on top of Candy's manager and they were in a car with Candy driving the car. He said that he has more evidences and all of them tell that Kathy is cheating on me. So, I collected everything from the PI and went straight to my lawyer. I asked my lawyer to have the divorce proceedings started ASAP. I went home. Kathy was not at home. I took this opportunity to call my in-laws and ask them to come for dinner as I have an announcement to make. I asked them to keep this as a surprise for Kathy, and they agreed. My mother-in-law went a step further to ask me about the gender of my baby. If only I could tell her what I was going to do tonight. My in-laws arrived by 7 p.m. and took them to drawing room and placed all the evidence in front of them. My father-in-law was furious and started to shake with anger. I had to calm him down and he started crying and apologizing. My mother-in-law was not able to believe all this and said this is all fake. I explained that as we speak your daughter is still with that corn star in her manger. I called the PI and asked to share a live feed. Kathy's mother was shocked to see that her daughter getting intimate and Candy was standing with a camera recording that. She hugged me and told me that she did not raise her daughter like that. I told them both that I tried to provide Kathy with everything and tried my best to be a good husband. He both hugged me and said they wished they had me as a son. Kathy arrived around 10:30 p.m. and was shocked to see her parents and me sitting in the drawing room. She was wearing a pink dress and it was very revealing. Kathy's mother was disgusted and screamed some choice words at her daughter. Her parents then left saying they just wanted to see her for the last time and never to even look towards them, let alone try to contact them. Kathy looked to me and said, "What did you do? What did you tell them? You destroyed my family." I gave her the envelope and told her to leave my house. I told her that she has 2 hours to pack her stuff and get out. She started crying and said, "Where will she go at night?" I told her you have earned money and can afford to live somewhere. She started screaming at me saying if I'm spying on her. I showed her OnlyFans page on my phone. She was taken aback but then shot back saying I have done no wrong. I just posed for a picture. I have a good body and I am proud to display it. She threatened me that she will see me in court and she will rip me apart and she will make sure that I lie in a desert drying out. I was recording all of that on a camera set up in the room. I told her she has 1 hour and 45 minutes left before I call the cops. I was angry, and today I had seen a new side of Kathy. She stormed to her room and packed 2 big bags and left the house. I saw that manager guy drive up and picked her up. Got a call from Kathy's father, and he asked not to put the videos as part of the evidence and asked if the divorce can be done without that. I had told them I can try, but did not promise. I met Kathy a few days later at the court. She was accompanied by Candy and her manager. Kathy was dressed like a corn star. I had asked the lawyer not to put the videos in the files and try to see if we can go without them. He agreed. In the court, Kathy denied all allegations of infidelity and blamed me for domestic abuse. She explained that I did not take care of her and did not perform my duty as a husband. I was furious. Luckily, all my spending were done by credit card. I quickly downloaded my bills and sent them to my lawyer. Also signaled my lawyer to take the gloves off. It was now my turn. My lawyer destroyed all the charges. Domestic abuse charges never stood a chance, and there was no evidence of Kathy ever calling for help. The video where Kathy was threatening me was played, proving her intention. My credit card bills proved that I was ensuring that Kathy had everything she wanted. Now it was time to bring in the videos. The lawyer first started with the OnlyFans images, then shared the video that proved that Kathy was indeed cheating. The court finalized the divorce, and I did not have to pay her anything. My lawyer proved that her OnlyFans income was going to be 5 times more than my monthly salary, and in turn, she should be paying alimony to me. I let go of the alimony and asked to be just divorced. I know that OnlyFans income is temporary and will dry up as soon as she gets a bit old. I got my freedom and went back to my home. I was in my home and was wondering, why did Kathy cheat on me? Why did she choose people out of her marriage? Where did I go wrong? I wanted to know, but then I thought it will bring in more pain. I plan to be single for some time, and maybe once I am healed mentally, I would try and date again. It has been more than 2 years, and now I am married again, and I have a kid as well. My daughter is amazing and is joy to be with. My wife works in the same bank as mine. Life is good, and I try my best to keep it that way. I never met or heard from Kathy again, but I hope she is fine. I don't hold anything against her anymore. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, his world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I've built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword." As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chun sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What have you found?" His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Just tell me, Liv." "All right," she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. "Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law." Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. "And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works." "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this?" Olivia's heart ached for her friend. "These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. "You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back." As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Ethan, long time no hear, cuz." "What's up?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad." The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. "What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do." There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. "I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged. With Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents, Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "We need to lure them into a false sense of security," Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. "Make them think they've won completely." Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. "You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation." Ethan's jaw clenched. "My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose." Olivia nodded approvingly. "It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes." And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. "Poor Ethan," they'd say. "He's really lost it since Victoria left him." Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night he, Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sofia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sofia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured, "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done. Because it's not ancient history, Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them. Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I always wondered if I was the only one, she whispered. If I was just weak, stupid. Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. You weren't weak or stupid, Sophia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us? Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. Tell me what you need me to do. As Ethan left the cafe, Sophia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably. But in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. Johnson, she barked, striding into the office an hour later. I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands. Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what it takes, she hissed into the receiver. Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now. But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat, serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. "FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now." "Shit," Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I covered my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. Ethan, thank God. Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please. I know I hurt you, but no. The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. What? Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. I said no, Victoria, Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. But Ethan, please, Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty Scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand. A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. "She told me it was just creative accounting," Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong." As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal," she said, her voice quavering. "I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know." Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour." Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal, the struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To friends who become family, and to new beginnings." As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal, someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences, their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to.
I grew up in a small town in Texas, where the local saying was, "Everyone knows everyone." My father worked as a translator at the U.S. Embassy, so my childhood was full of stories about different countries and languages. When I turned 18, my family moved to England because of my father's job, and that's where I attended college. During my years at Oxford, I immersed myself in computer technology, business management, and economics. I thrived in the challenging academic environment and built lifelong friendships, particularly with my sister Patricia. After graduating, I returned to the U.S., ready to make my own mark. My name is Dan Colton, and before I get into the more difficult part of this story, I need to introduce you to my ex-wife, Emily. I keep in shape by jogging 2 laps around the park every morning when I can. I'm 5'10" and weigh 180 pounds, staying fit by swimming several miles a week and hitting an old-school gym twice a week for weightlifting and MMA training. I'm not a martial arts expert, but I can hold my own, which is why most of my weight is muscle. Despite my degrees, a master's in computer technology, a postgraduate in business management, and a bachelor's in economics from Oxford University, people often say I somewhat resemble George Clooney. Because my father worked as a translator at the U.S. Embassy, I stayed to finish my studies while he returned to the U.S. to work as a computer repair specialist after his service. Now, I manage a well-known company and oversee a new program designed for various applications, from gaming to military use. This program's ability to handle issues in real time is crucial, and it should be ready within 6 months to a year. I love my sister Patricia, or Pat as I call her, and she loves me. We're very close, sharing everything and keeping no secrets. She's 2 years younger than me and currently works as a junior partner at a reputable New York law firm. Emily, my ex-wife, keeps fit by going to the gym at least 4 times a week. She's 5'3" with a stunning figure, 34B bust, 22-inch waist, and 33-inch hips, with red hair and green eyes to match her fiery temper. Her face is angelic, and her smile can light up a room. She's a corporate attorney at XYZ, a PR and advertising firm, where she works after earning her law degree. We met at Pat's graduation. Pat, Emily's sister, and Amy were roommates and introduced us at the graduation party. Coincidentally, we lived just 3 miles apart in the mid-sized town of Freestone, Texas. We started dating 6 months later and hit it off, getting married 6 months after that. After our wedding, Emily began her career at XYZ as a junior attorney with a modest salary plus bonuses. I worked for ABC Flight Controllers, where I assembled and dissected software code for a mid-5-figure salary and bonus. The 3-bedroom house I inherited from my grandparents was in a good neighborhood. My sister received a lump sum inheritance, while Emily's sister and parents stayed in New York. My parents had retired to Florida. Twice a year, we hosted family gatherings for Thanksgiving and Christmas at various locations. Life was good. We were happy with our modest income, nice cars, and 2 vacations every year. After 2 years, Emily was promoted to junior partner, and things began to change. She started going out with her friends on Friday nights a few times a month, and worked late more often. Naturally, I became suspicious and went about my usual routines, like reading her emails, checking her underwear, and even installing a keylogger on her laptop. Although I knew I was paranoid, it didn't mean my concerns were unfounded. I even followed her one night. Nothing inappropriate happened. She didn't even dance with other men. So why did I feel something was wrong in our marriage? Emily wanted to become a senior partner before starting a family, which would take about another 5 years. She was happy with her job. Meanwhile, I felt stuck in mine, with no opportunities for advancement. Since it was a family-owned business, promotions only went to relatives, no matter how unqualified they were. I decided to start my own computer repair business, not the kind where people bring their laptops to a shop. I targeted businesses needing enhanced security systems and system upgrades. Before jumping in, I did a business analysis and expected a slow start, but within a year, I would earn more than my current job. I sat down with Emily to explain that while the initial year would be tough, we would be better off in the long run. I avoided mentioning the new software I was developing to keep things simple. She was completely against the idea, questioning why I would risk everything when we were doing well. She was thriving, and I was in a dead-end job. Emily and I had always kept our finances separate except for our joint account, which covered all the bills. We each contributed equally for monthly expenses and saved the rest. I left my job and started my new business using savings and a loan on my house. I began advertising and made phone calls from a small workshop I rented, which had an attached office. In 3 months, I was satisfied, breaking even. My work on the new software was also progressing well. Then one evening, Emily hit me with shocking news. She was 3 months pregnant with twins. Paranoia set in, and I checked the timeline of her activities. She'd been in Miami for a week on business. It struck me then. She was cheating. I immediately decided to get a DNA test. From the moment she learned of the pregnancy, she cut off all affection, at least toward me. She insisted on abstaining, fearing damage to the babies, even though both I and the doctor reassured her she was overreacting. Despite this, we did the usual things. I attended her relaxation classes, massaged her feet every night, rubbed oil on her growing belly to prevent stretch marks, and put up with her increasingly sour moods. Meanwhile, my company was growing. I hired a fresh computer technician, Greg, and appointed May as the receptionist. Emily showed no interest in my business, so I never bothered discussing it with her. The day finally arrived when she went into labor. I was with a client, discussing a server upgrade, when I got the call. The client congratulated me and sent me on my way. Emily was already at the hospital, her go-bag ready and waiting. I rushed over, grabbed her suitcase and the DNA kit, and drove her to the hospital. She was admitted to a private room in the prenatal ward. After the doctor checked her, he said it would still take some time. Despite my doubts about the twins' paternity, I was excited about the possibility of becoming a father. The doctor suggested I go home, saying it would be a while yet, and promised to call me when it was time for the delivery. I went home, ate, sat around, and eventually fell asleep. The phone rang. Emily was fully dilated, experiencing contractions every 7 minutes. The babies were almost here. It was 2:30 a.m. I grabbed a coat and rushed to the car. Why do babies always seem to arrive at odd hours? I sped to the hospital, making it just in time to watch the first baby being delivered. A few minutes later, the second followed. The nurse checked both babies, counting their fingers and toes, then washed them. While her back was turned, I swabbed each baby for the DNA tests as she helped clean up my wife. Even though I already felt a connection, I needed to know for sure if they were mine. Emily looked at me with sad eyes and said she loved me as I kissed her gently. Emily was moved to the recovery unit to rest, and they advised me to go home. The next day, I called everyone to share the wonderful news. The grandparents were thrilled, eager to see their new grandchildren. Pat and Amy promised to arrange time off to visit their niece and nephew. On my way to the hospital, carrying flowers for Emily, I dropped off the DNA kit and was told the results would take about 10 days. Emily would be staying at the hospital. The doctor said she had suffered severe tears that needed time to heal. For the next 5 days, I visited her daily, but she seemed distant and quiet. When I asked the doctor about her behavior, he simply replied, "She'll get over it. It happens sometimes." He mentioned she would be discharged on Saturday afternoon. During my visit on Friday, I counted down the hours until I could bring them home. The nursery was ready for our new babies. Saturday morning, I made sure everything was set up for her return. The safety cots were securely fastened. At 1:30, I headed to the hospital to bring my family home. I walked straight to her room, but it was empty. "Where are my wife and kids?" I asked the nurse. "Another man has already taken them," she replied. "Who?" I demanded, panic rising. I tried calling Emily's cell, but there was no response. The senior nurse arrived to handle the situation, reporting it to security, who then contacted the police. When the officers arrived, a man and a woman, both detectives, were shown to the security room to review the footage from that morning. They returned to inform me, "It seems Emily left with the man willingly. We know who he is, but we can't disclose his identity." Stunned, I asked, "What am I supposed to do now?" "Go home, Mr. Colton," they advised. "We will be in touch." Sick with worry, I sat at home, anxiously waiting for news. Around 6 that evening, I noticed the same 2 detectives knocking on my door. When neither looked me in the eye, I asked, "What's going on?" The woman spoke first. "Mr. Colton, we can't tell you where your wife and children are, but they are safe." "I'm really sorry," she added softly. I stared at her, confused. "I have no idea where my family is, and Emily won't answer her phone." The male detective stepped forward. "I regret to inform you that your wife left you and took the kids. She stated that her attorney would be in contact soon." My heart sank as I listened in disbelief. "Please don't do anything foolish," the detective warned. "I'd hate to have to take further action." They left, leaving me alone once again. My hands trembled, and I felt hollow inside, on the verge of being sick. I had hit rock bottom. I started to cry. Sunday morning, I woke up having cried myself to sleep. I showered and put on some decent clothes. I made breakfast on autopilot. After eating, feeling a bit better, I thought, maybe Emily's parents know something. I called her dad. "Hello," he answered. "Hi, it's me," I said quickly. "Everyone left, saying they'd be visiting next weekend. I need to tell you what happened." He tried to respond, but I cut him off. "Listen, I don't want excuses. Just call Emily and get back to me." Can't believe she would act like this. By lunchtime, I went to Denny's for an unhealthy meal. A mega burger with fries, onion rings, and a beer. Feeling a bit better, I returned home and checked the answering machine. No messages. I turned on the TV, but my mind kept replaying the events of the last few days. Eventually, I gave up. It was past midnight, so I went to bed. My thoughts wouldn't quiet down, so I got up at 6 the next morning, showered, and went downstairs for breakfast. I was sitting there staring at the news on TV when the phone rang. It was Emily's attorney. "Can you meet later today?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. 2 o'clock works." He hung up. Maybe now I'll get some answers, I thought. At his office, I was shown in immediately. I expected to see just the attorney, but Jimmy Prescott, her boss, was also there, sitting on the sofa. I decided to keep silent for the moment, needing answers. This made everyone visibly uneasy. The lawyer finally spoke. "Mr. Colton, you're here to discuss the terms of your divorce from Mrs. Emily Colton. Your wife and Mr. Prescott have a brief proposal for you. She will divorce you on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. You'll keep your business, your property, your retirement, basically all of your savings. She'll do the same. However, you must also sign documents allowing Mr. Prescott to adopt your children. In return, Mr. Prescott will deposit $2 million into an account of your choosing." I jumped up so fast I almost knocked over the desk. "Absolutely not," I shouted. "My kids are not for sale at any price. You can have that strumpet for nothing. I don't want anything to do with her, so get lost." Emily stood up and spoke softly, trying to calm me down. "Dan, I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Jimmy and I have been seeing each other for a while, and we really want to get married. He wants to adopt the kids because, sadly, he can't have any of his own." I cut her off. "Oh, so the kids would have everything, right? A big house, the best schools, the perfect life?" I sneered. "And what do I have to offer? An old rundown house and a small computer repair business?" My voice dripped with sarcasm. "Is that why you want out? Because I lack ambition, money, and can't give the kids a better future?" Her tone turned icy. "If you refuse to sign, I'll take you to the cleaners. I'll take your house, half your income, half your savings, your 401k, your business, and I'll make sure you never see your kids again. You're in a no-win situation. Our way, you at least get something." "Go to hell, Emily," I snapped. "You have no claim to the house. It's mine. Half of nothing is still nothing. I don't have savings, and you earn more than I do, so support payments will be minimal. I'll see my kids every other weekend and happily pay child support. As for my business, without me, it doesn't exist. As for your threats, see you in court." With that, I turned and stormed out, leaving 3 stunned people behind. I went straight to Denny's for dinner. After eating, I drove home to a cold, empty house. I sat with a beer, staring at the TV, furious at myself for not checking the peephole before opening the door. I woke up around 11 to a knock, still a bit groggy. As I opened the door, it was slammed inward with such force that I staggered back, but managed to stay on my feet. 3 men rushed in, trying to grab me, but I was fully awake now. I struck the first one in the throat with extended knuckles. The second guy tried to put me in a headlock and force me to the floor. While I was breaking free, the third man hit my shin with a baseball bat, and I fell. I began losing consciousness as the first man lay on the ground, choking. The other 2 kicked me, assuming they'd finish me off. They needed to leave enough evidence for the police to follow up. As I started to black out, their leader lifted me to my feet. "Now, be a good boy and sign the papers, or we'll be back," he said, his face inches from mine. I headbutted him in the nose, feeling the warm blood splatter across my face. Now I had his DNA. I quickly pulled my handkerchief from my pocket and dabbed some of his blood onto it. Screaming, he turned away, clutching his face and cursing at me. I started to black out again, only to be jolted awake when he kicked me in the ribs. I fainted, collapsing against the wall. I woke up slowly, hearing voices, but unable to recognize who they belonged to. I saw vague shapes in the room, but couldn't identify them. Then darkness took over again. The next time I woke, bright sunlight filled the room. I looked around and saw a woman seated in a chair. It took me a moment to recognize her as Cam, the wife of my MMA instructor, Nick Wright. I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry. I croaked out a sound. Cam came over and pressed the call button. A nurse came in and checked my vitals. She smiled and asked how I was feeling. The ice chips she gave me tasted better than the finest scotch. Cam quickly dialed her phone with one hand while holding mine. "How are you feeling?" "Glad to have you back among the living, Dan. You really scared us for a while," she said. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I croaked. "A truck might have done less damage," she replied with a wry smile. At that moment, a doctor entered. "I'm so glad to see you finally awake. You've been in a coma for 3 days, but I think you're on the mend now." "Doc, could I get something to eat? I feel like I could eat a whole cow. Just pull out the horns and wipe its rear," I groaned. Everyone laughed, but when I tried to join in, the pain in my side made me nearly pass out. The doctor adjusted my pain medication and showed me how to use the button for more morphine. I drifted in and out of a morphine-induced sleep for what seemed like hours. When Nick finally arrived, I realized it had been just over an hour. He filled me in on what happened. I'd been attacked in my home, and the neighborhood watch found my front door open. They called the police and an ambulance, and the officers found Nick's number in my phone under ice, in case of emergency. Either Nick or Cam had been with me ever since. He then described my injuries. A fractured left tibia, shattered radius, 2 cracked ribs, a perforated lung, a damaged kidney, a cracked eye socket, and a broken nose. "Other than that, you're fine," he joked, making me smile. When Nick and Cam left to go home, a detective named Graham Coles entered the room. "How much of the attack do you remember?" he asked. I recounted the leader's message. When I mentioned having a DNA sample on my handkerchief, he placed it in an evidence bag, clearly pleased. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, the room was empty, shrouded in darkness. The next day, Nick visited and offered to let me stay at his house until I could move around on my own again. I asked him to pick up my mail from my place, and he agreed. I also inquired if he knew a good divorce attorney. He nodded and promised to get back to me. After a bit more conversation, I drifted off to sleep again. When I woke up, a nurse was checking my vitals. She mentioned that everything looked good and clean, with no signs of infection. She changed my bandages shortly after they brought me some food. Eating with one arm was tricky, so she had to cut up my meal. I slept well that night and woke up feeling refreshed. The nurse gave me a bed bath, but I didn't react. I was still too sore. Later, Nick arrived with a stunning woman who he introduced as my new lawyer, Grace Miles. She confirmed that I still had visitation rights for my kids and agreed to take on my case. We reviewed the situation together before she left. Nick stayed with me while I sorted through the mail he had brought. When I opened the DNA results, I initially felt a wave of rage, but then I started to laugh. Neither of the kids was mine. Emily had been cheating on both Jimmy and me, a classic cheater. I explained the situation to Nick once I stopped laughing, and his face went pale. Having had a change of heart, I decided to discuss a settlement. I called Grace and asked her to set up a meeting with Emily, Jimmy, their attorney, and myself at the hospital. She arranged for us to meet the next day in a borrowed office. When Nick wheeled me into the room, my arm and leg in casts, tubes running into my body, Emily looked flawless. My face, like most of my body, was bruised black and blue. Emily seemed shocked at my appearance, while Jimmy just smirked. Staring at them, I began, "Well, I changed my mind after some of your friends visited, and don't bother denying it, Jimmy. The last thing your thugs said was to sign the papers. Who else would want me to sign over the kids without the $2 million incentive?" I handed over the new paperwork my lawyer had prepared. Your original proposal made it seem like I was selling the kids, and my lawyer explained how that could open me up to human trafficking charges. Nice try, though. Their attorney eyed the documents suspiciously as I continued. My lawyer and I have drafted a new settlement. Here it is. Grace handed the paperwork to their attorney, with copies for Emily and Jimmy. Your offer is nothing like ours. Let me break it down for you. I keep my house, everything in it, my savings, my business, both cars, and my wife's jewelry. Additionally, she deposits the $18,000 from her not-so-secret mercantile credit account into my attorney's holding account. You prick! That's my money! You can't have it! Emily sputtered, her face turning crimson as a vein pulsed in her neck. Jimmy looked at her in surprise. It seemed he had no idea about her secret account. Gently, he pulled her back into her seat, still smirking. I think that moment put the first nail in the coffin of their relationship. If he hadn't cared so much for the kids, he might have walked out right then. Sit down and shut up, you cheating liar. The adults are talking, he snapped. Emily went silent, her face shifting from red to pale. As I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, I continued, since she earns significantly more than I do, she will also pay me $2,500 a month in spousal support, deposited into my attorney's account. As for the company you both work for, to compensate for destroying my marriage and for my injuries, you will pay me $10 million, net of taxes, into my attorney's account, along with covering all my medical expenses, legal fees, and aftercare costs. This must be paid by 5 p.m. this coming Friday. Jimmy started laughing uncontrollably. Are you insane? Why should we pay you everything we have? We're only here for 20%. Excuse me? I replied. Did you say 20%? Yes, 20%, he barked. I heard you, but do you know what that means? I asked calmly. Is this some number you pulled out of thin air to back up your nonsense? He challenged. No, I said. I did thorough research on your company's clients and revenue. Since your company is publicly traded, all this information is readily available online. It's completely legitimate. Now, think about how this will impact your father's congressional campaign. After all, he's running on a family values platform. Then consider your clientele. You have several high-profile entertainment and political clients. One hint of scandal, and they'll abandon you. Next, your advertising branch. You represent 2 children's clothing stores, a baby product company, and a sports goods manufacturer. Every well-known brand will drop you like a hot potato, and you'll be scapegoated at a board meeting when things hit the fan. So, you see, $10 million is actually quite reasonable. Jimmy looked unwell, no longer arrogant. My attorney will send the full amount. It should be in her account by Friday at 5 o'clock. No one had anything else to say, but I could see Jimmy still contemplating his escape. I continued. Oh, and Jimmy, if you think my disappearance will let you off the hook, I've sent the whole story to 5 out-of-state attorneys. If anything happens to me, they'll notify the media. His defeated expression told me I'd hit the mark. As we walked away, I called out, 5 p.m. Friday. Later, back in my room, Grace asked why I gave in and let Jimmy adopt my children. She glanced at the DNA test results I handed her and laughed. You clever prick. The kids aren't yours? I'm not sure yet. This shows she was cheating on both Jimmy and me. I intend to find out and make sure Jimmy knows. Dan, I'd hate to be on your bad side. You'd have made a great attorney. Thanks, but I don't have the eliminator instinct. You do, you just haven't used it. The doctor visited later, saying I could go home the next day if I had help. I stayed with Nick and Cam for a while, visiting the hospital twice a week to change my dressings and monitor my kidney's recovery. On Friday, I waited nervously for 5 p.m., but my attorney called at 3:30. The money was in the account, $10,861,312. Wow, I was rich. Grace paid her share and transferred the rest to my checking account. Life went on. After 8 weeks of care from friends, I returned home, but the house felt empty and depressing. I decided to move closer to my sister. At work, I called Greg and May into a meeting. I explained I needed a fresh start elsewhere, thanked them, and handed over ownership of the business, including all profits earned in my absence. Then, I took them out to dinner. Next, I treated Nick and Cam to dinner and gave them a check for $500,000 for taking care of me. They tried to refuse, but I insisted. It was Jimmy's employer's money, not mine. They finally accepted. Over a glass of wine, I told them I was moving to New York to be near my sister. Nick asked about my house, and I said I'd probably rent it out. He hesitated, so I urged him to speak up. He mentioned his son Eric, who had just graduated with an engineering degree, was getting married and needed a place to live. Would I rent the house to him? I agreed, telling Nick to set the rent based on what they could afford and use the money for a college fund for their baby. Cam hugged me so hard I thought she broke my ribs again. The next day, Nick cried. I called Patty to let her know I was coming to stay with her until I found a place. She was thrilled and began planning activities. 3 weeks later, I closed my front door for the last time, shed a few tears, and handed the keys to Nick. I also left Emily's car title for his son as a housewarming gift. We hugged and promised to stay in touch. After a leisurely 2-week road trip, I arrived at Patty's. She hugged me until I gasped for air. "We're going out to dinner with a friend. Just wear slacks and a shirt," she said. When we got there, Emily's sister Amy was waiting. We went to a casual diner with a bar, and I realized I'd been set up. I was annoyed at first, but I couldn't stay mad at Patty for long, so I decided to go with it. Ami hugged Patty as we reached the table, then, to my surprise, hugged me too, cursing Emily and wishing she'd rot in hell. Amy worked in accounting at an advertising company nearby. The evening went well, with Amy being the first to pull me onto the dance floor. We danced 2 waltzes and a slow song, then returned to Patty, who said, "You two look like a perfect couple." Ami blushed, and I quickly headed to the restroom. The rest of the evening, I danced with both Amy and Patty, avoiding the slow songs. At the end of the night, we put Amy in a cab and called one for ourselves. Patty just laughed and went to bed when we got home, ignoring my complaints about setting me up. The next day, we went house hunting. I preferred a house over an apartment, imagining barbecues and having friends over. Despite the high prices, thanks to being near New York City, I decided to buy with cash. After weeks of searching, I found a 3-bedroom home with separate living, kitchen, and dining areas, a decent yard, and a secure community entrance guarded 24/7. Patty loved it and joked about moving in with me. I had to furnish the house, buying all the essentials like towels, pots, and pans. Luckily, it came with kitchen appliances, but I still had to stock up on food and basics. Ami and Patty were invaluable in helping me, giving the place a homey touch rather than a man cave look. I set up one area as my workspace, complete with a custom motherboard, a top-of-the-line computer, and a fire-resistant safe. Patty and Amy insisted on a housewarming party, inviting their friends since I knew no one around. The plan worked. Soon I was on multiple social media and contact lists. For the next 3 weeks, weekends were filled with parties and barbecues. I barely thought of Emily and enjoyed my new social life. Ami and I grew closer during this time, more than friends, but not quite lovers. One evening, Patty and Amy planned to go to the theater, but Patty canceled last minute, leaving just Amy and me. During the taming of the shrew, Amy reached over and grabbed my hand. This was a surprise since the most we'd done before was a cheek kiss. After the play, we took a taxi to Amy's apartment, but it left before I could head home. I cursed, realizing there wouldn't be another cab this far out of town. Laughing, Amy said, "Then you'd better stay the night." She kissed me deeply, leading me inside. As we got to her bedroom, she asked, "What does a girl have to do to get you to sleep with her?" I figured it was time I made the first move. It was the best night of my life. "Now let me return the favor," I said, to which she replied, "What did you do to me? I've never felt this way before." At 1 p.m., we woke up starving and went to a neighborhood deli for lunch. Back at Ami's place, we talked about what had happened. She confessed she had liked me since we first met and, after my split with Emily, had turned to Patty for help in getting us together. I admitted I was interested in her too, but thought it would be inappropriate to approach my ex-wife's sister. Ami said she appreciated my consideration but had run out of patience, so she and Patty planned the previous night. Then, with a laugh, she texted Patty, "Mission accomplished." Amy drove me home to change. Unlike her sister, Amy didn't pick fights over little things, which made me feel at ease. Patty noticed this and often commented on how happy she was for us. We just seemed to fit. During this time, I was working on my project, which I finally completed. The beauty of these programs and hardware was their versatility. They could be adapted for military, gaming, aviation, and automotive applications. Knowing that thorough testing by gamers would reveal any flaws, I decided to reach out to a top game developer. When I approached the gaming company, they were skeptical, believing they already had the best programmers. After some negotiation, they agreed to a 3-month trial. I provided sealed units and tamper-proof software. After the trial, they called a meeting. I brought my sister, a corporate attorney, and one of her colleagues experienced in such negotiations, knowing the patents could be sold for much more in global sales. The company offered $120 million for the patents. However, I insisted on licensing rights for 10 years instead. My goal was $50 million plus a 1% royalty on all applications using my hardware and software for the same period. After hours of negotiation, we settled on $65 million and a 5% royalty for 10 years. Contracts were signed and a handshake sealed the deal. I was suddenly very wealthy, even after taxes. Similar negotiations followed with the military's aeronautical department, a top aircraft supplier, and a major automaker. My post-tax cash assets were valued at over $250 million, with a 10-year potential worth more than $3.5 billion. Unsure of what to do with such wealth, I sought investment advice, knowing even basic interest would earn me over $12 million annually before taxes. My sister was renting her apartment, dating another attorney, and Amy and I had moved in together. Things were getting serious. A year had passed since I started my new life, and I decided it was time for some payback against those who had hurt me. I sat down with Amy and said, "I still want to get back at your sister. Are you okay with that?" She replied, "Burn the witch. I'll help if you need it." We discussed various plans, but decided to wait before taking action. Just after dinner, the phone rang. An assistant DA from Freestone, Texas, asked if I would testify in 3 weeks. They had caught the people who attacked me. I agreed, and Amy insisted on coming with me. We decided to make a quick trip, arriving a week before the trial. We flew to Texas, where Nick picked us up and dropped us off at our motel. As a thank you, we took Nick and Cam to dinner at the Regency Club. The women looked stunning in cocktail dresses, while I wore a $2,000 Italian suit, and Nick donned his best church outfit. None of us had been to this restaurant before, so it was a special night. A uniformed doorman opened the car doors, then the restaurant door. The head waiter guided us to our table as Cam and Nick admired the pianist playing soft music. We enjoyed a light appetizer of thinly sliced melon and Parma ham, followed by our choice of entrees and fruit salad, accompanied by red and dessert wines. While savoring the wine, I noticed Emily and her husband, Jimmy, seated nearby with another couple. Ami excused herself to use the powder room, with Cam following. They had to pass by Emily's table. I watched as Emily froze, covering her mouth in shock. Amy greeted her, pointed to me, and said something that made Cam laugh. Emily rushed out of the restaurant with Jimmy in tow. When Amy and Cam returned, I asked what Amy had said. Amy explained, "After Cam said hi, Emily asked who I was with. I replied, 'I'm with another millionaire sitting over there. Thanks for divorcing him. We were meant to be together. You obviously traded down.' Then I added, 'I don't see what you ever saw in that stuffed monkey,' and walked away." We danced and laughed about Ami's encounter late into the night. The next day, while Nick and Cam worked, Amy and I played tourists, even spending a day at a weapon range where Amy proved to be a surprisingly good shot. The day before the trial, we had dinner at Nick and Cam's house. Home-cooked food tasted so much better than restaurant fare. We toasted their upcoming wedding, and Nick shared that his son was getting married in the spring. When we met with the assistant DA, he called the case a slam dunk. My providing the DNA of the trio's leader had helped identify him. He was prepared to testify against his accomplices. The trial concluded with the leader receiving a 15-year sentence in exchange for testifying. The one I struck in the throat got 2 years since he didn't actively participate in the attack, while the other received 5 years for his first offense. After Nick and Cam dropped us off at the airport, I handed Nick an envelope and told him not to open it until after we had taken off. Inside were the deeds to my old house, a wedding gift for his son. I had shown it only to his son, understanding the importance of wedding vows. After settling in at home, I called my sister, inviting her and her partner to dinner on Friday without telling Ami. When Friday arrived, I finally let Ami in on the dinner plans, and she was thrilled. That evening, we took a limo to a restaurant I had booked 3 weeks in advance. After a hearty meal, a man in a gypsy costume approached our table and played a love ballad on his violin. Then, to Amy's surprise, he got down on one knee and proposed to her. Through tears of joy and applause from the whole restaurant, she said yes. Her expression was priceless. My sister walked over, hugged Amy, and said, "Welcome to the family." We danced for the rest of the evening before the limo took us home. Our wedding was set for early spring and invitations went out. I stayed out of the planning, leaving it to Amy and my sister. The ceremony took place at a nearby church, and I covered lodging for all out-of-town guests, reserving a full floor at the Hilton for their 3-day stay. The wedding was a grand event and everyone had a fantastic time. Nick and Cam said they hadn't had so much fun in years. They invited us to their son's wedding, planned for 2 months later, complete with daily excursions and evening dances. Ami and I spent 2 weeks sailing the Caribbean. We needed another break after our wedding and returned completely exhausted. By then, I had a troubleshooting team in place to handle any issues with my program and hardware, allowing me to take things slow while planning my next steps for retribution. 9 months later, our son James was born, followed by his sister Sarah a year later. We moved into a larger house, but stayed within our safe community. By this point, I was quite wealthy and even became somewhat of a celebrity, frequently attending charitable events. Some society magazines began calling Ami and me the ideal couple. However, I never let go of my desire for revenge. The pain of what had been done to me lingered. Over the past 5 years, I had hired a PI to gather information on Emily, Jimmy, and everyone connected to them, including her former boss, Troy Simmons. I wanted to know if Troy was the father of Emily's twins. The PI confirmed my suspicions. The twins were Troy's. Additionally, Emily was still seeing Troy and 2 other men, while Jimmy was occupied with his father's business and a string of escorts. The first phase of my plan began with a revelation. I sent Jimmy the twins' DNA results along with Troy's, adding a note that read, "Do the math." This confirmed the twins were not his and revealed Emily's ongoing affairs. I also included evidence of her current infidelities, then stepped back to let the chaos unfold. 2 months later, Nick called to inform me that Jimmy had kicked Emily out, using their prenup to keep the kids he had adopted. She was left with nothing, and no one knew where she had gone. Ami called Emily's parents to see if they had any information, but her father replied, "Don't contact us again," and mentioned he had only wired her a couple of $1,000s. Emily was now feeling the sting of betrayal and loss. Phase 1 was complete. Her email account was still active, so I sent her the PI's report on Jimmy, including photos of him with various women. I thought, this should stir things up. A few days later, as Ami and I watched an old movie, the security gate's intercom chimed. "Miss Prescott wants to visit," I told Amy. "Shall we let her in?" Amy shrugged. "Let's hear what she has to say." I instructed the guard to let her in. A short while later, there was a knock at the door. When Amy opened it, Emily stood there looking disheveled, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, no makeup. Amy gestured for her to come inside, and as she walked in, I noticed she avoided making eye contact with me. Ami handed her a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully before sitting down. Though part of me felt pity, I also recalled the pain she had caused. "You look like a wreck. What happened to you?" I asked. Emily broke down, unable to speak for 10 minutes. Then, through tears, she explained, "He found out I was seeing Troy all along. He figured out the twins weren't his. Then, after our marriage, he discovered I was still seeing Troy. He went wild and threw me out in the clothes I was wearing. I checked into a motel. I had my laptop in my car and a couple thousand in my account. No one would speak to me after what I did to you. My family disowned me." She glanced up, eyes red and puffy. I called his father Barry, who told me he didn't need me anymore since he now had an heir to the family fortune. My dad finally agreed to talk to me, wired me a few thousand, and told me never to call again. She looked at Amy, adding, "I had nowhere else to go, so I came here hoping you might pity me." "I didn't expect any help from you." She nodded at me. "I know you wouldn't piss on me if I were on fire. I'm sorry for everything. I was cruel and selfish and deserved this, but I miss my children. I was a terrible wife, but I was a good mother." She paused, looking defeated, and stopped her rehearsed speech. While I knew she had practiced it, most of what she said was true. I felt some pity for her, but I still wanted to deal with Jimmy, though that could wait. He had caused me suffering, and his time was coming. Emily mentioned she hadn't eaten in 2 days. When Amy asked if she was hungry, Emily nodded. Amy made bacon, eggs, hash browns, and pancakes. Emily asked for more coffee, which Amy provided, and she quickly devoured the meal. Afterward, Ami showed her to the guest bedroom and left some clothes on the bed for her. While Emily showered, Amy and I discussed our next steps. As much as I hate her, she's still my sister. We should help, Amy admitted. I agreed, partly to annoy Jimmy by showing her recovery. For now, we decided to let her stay in the guest room until we found other options. I'll take her shopping for basics tomorrow, Amy said. Emily came back downstairs looking more rested. We told her the plan for the next few days and she started crying again. Later, we all went to bed. The next morning, Emily prepared breakfast, coffee, and buttered toast. I joined Amy at the table. Dan, I'm so lucky. I didn't expect this kindness, Emily said. You took my family from me, I replied. What you did was unforgivable, but with Amy's love, I can finally forgive you. I won't dwell on it anymore. No more apologies. This chapter ends here. I added, You're going shopping with Amy today, but just to Walmart. She nodded. Later that day, I looked for housing options for Emily. Fortunately, a one-bedroom house 2 streets away was available. It was move-in ready, fully equipped, and the owner was posted overseas for 3 years. After inspecting it, I paid a year's rent and a security deposit. When the girls returned from shopping, I shared the news. Emily hugged me, thanking me through tears. Ami grinned and blew a kiss. Emily turned to me and whispered, I don't know what I was thinking when I messed up our marriage. I should never have let you go. Ami, take good care of him. He's the best man you'll ever find. Then she hurried upstairs, hiding her emotions. Alone with Amy, I explained my plans to help Emily and take down Jimmy and his father. We loaded Amy's van and arranged for the rest to be delivered the next day. As Emily shopped for essentials, the girls found a place for everything in the new house. It was like magic, fitting it all in. We chose to support Emily financially, giving her a credit card with a $1,000 monthly limit and $10,000 for her checking account. More hugs and tears followed. That night in bed, Amy said, I'm glad you didn't kick Emily when she was down. I replied that I hoped she learned her lesson and would treat her next partner better. The next day, we helped Emily settle into her new house, though she insisted on doing most of the work herself. She even invited us over for dinner that night. We left the kids with a sitter and headed over. Emily prepared a delicious meal, roast beef, baked potatoes, mixed veggies with garlic butter and honey, and for dessert, baked apples stuffed with raisins and topped with ice cream. We left completely full. Emily adjusted well, and in the following weeks, Amy and I agreed to help with her divorce. I arranged a meeting with an attorney. At Patty's recommendation, we met with Brian Scott. Although he didn't approve of Emily's past actions, he agreed to take on the case. Our main goal was getting her children back. Money was secondary. I have an idea, I said during the meeting. I allowed Jimmy to adopt the kids. When Brian mentioned this would be a challenge, I asked, what if the children aren't biologically mine? I explained that I had received $2 million for the kids, but refused, letting Jimmy adopt them without financial gain. However, I was considering seeking $10 million for alienation of affection against Jimmy and XYZ Advertising. I had signed a non-disclosure agreement with them to keep XYZ out of the divorce proceedings. If I violated it, I'd have to repay the money. I gave Brian the DNA reports proving that Troy Simmons was the father, showing that the children weren't mine. Therefore, Jimmy had no claim and the adoption was unofficial. This meant Emily could reclaim them. I clarified, this isn't just for Emily, it's to mess with Jimmy and his father. Brian nodded. Leave it to me and I'll get back to you. That evening, I told Amy what I had done, and she fully supported it. We then invited Emily over. She seemed nervous at first until I explained my plan. Grateful, she threw her arms around me, then quickly pulled back, embarrassed and apologizing. Don't worry about it, Amy and I said in unison. Let's leave it at that. A few days later, Brian contacted us and requested a meeting with Emily and me. He would now be representing her instead of me. During the meeting, he laid out his plan. First, he began, we'll file a motion to annul the adoption. He paused, looking at us before continuing. Second, I'll report to the state that Jimmy Prescott and his father, Barry, attempted to purchase children, violating the Anti-Slavery Act of 1865. He let that sink in. Third, we'll pursue charges for this offense. They coerced Mr. Dan Colton into allowing the adoption. Since the children weren't his biologically, the adoption is void. He showed us the DNA results to prove this. Emily will demand the return of her children, currently being kept at 218. Fifth, we'll sue Mr. Troy Simmons for sexual maltreatment as he forced the then Mrs. Colton into an affair to keep her job. Sixth, we'll pursue legal action against Jimmy Prescott for coercing Emily into a relationship that destroyed her marriage. He continued. Seventh, we'll file a lawsuit against XYZ Advertising for enabling the maltreatment and promoting the affair. Both CEO Jimmy Prescott and Chairman Barry Prescott knew about the affair and supported it, causing the marriage breakdown. Eighth, we'll charge Troy Simmons with alienation of affection, contributing to the end of Emily's marriage. Ninth, we'll charge Jimmy Prescott for the same reason. 10th, we'll go after XYZ Advertising for failing to include a morality clause in staff contracts despite knowing about the affair. And lastly, 11th, we'll sue XYZ for supporting the affair between Jimmy and Mrs. Colton, which led to the marriage's dissolution. Brian then looked at me and added, Finally, Mr. Colton acknowledges he signed an NDA for $10 million and is prepared to repay the amount if he breaks the agreement. We stood there, stunned by Brian's comprehensive plan. Emily, though shaken, seemed ready. I'll handle the fallout, she said. I brought this on myself. Move now, I told Brian, and XYZ will face a media attack targeting Troy Simmons, Jimmy Prescott, Barry Prescott, and the company. Brian nodded, saying he'd be ready in 2 weeks. I was to launch my attack a week later. Leaving Brian's office, I felt justice was within reach. Though Jimmy and Barry put up a legal fight, Brian pressed on. A week later, as planned, I sent all the gathered evidence to every media outlet. The media pounced, camping outside the courthouse and homes of those involved. As expected, XYZ's clients began threatening to cut ties. The board fired Troy Simmons without severance, and to stop the bleeding, Jimmy and Barry Prescott stepped down. XYZ also paid Emily a 7-figure settlement. With my own compensation, I would easily cover the $10 million NDA repayment. The fallout continued. Congressman Barry Prescott, known for his family values campaign, resigned, citing illness. Soon after, the FBI found financial anomalies, including payments to escorts and misuse of campaign funds. He was called before a select committee. Less than a month later, Emily regained custody of her children. Shortly after, Amy and I drove Emily and the kids to her parents' house for a reconciliation. I told her parents, I've forgiven her. While we may not be close friends, we're at least civil. I hope you can forgive her too. Seeing their grandchildren for the first time helped smooth things over. In the aftermath, Barry Prescott was sentenced to 3 years for campaign fund misuse. Jimmy was found guilty of attempted human trafficking and embezzling company funds, receiving a 5-year sentence. His sentence was longer because he refused to reveal where some of the missing money came from, money I had set him up to take. For my final revenge, I bribed the prison allocator to place Jimmy with a particularly dangerous inmate. Meanwhile, Emily moved into a larger home, retook her bar exams, and started working at the same law firm as Patty. Though we didn't socialize much, we occasionally babysat for each other. Emily hasn't dated since. She's focused on her career and children.
My wife had just finished university, and now the question of where she should find her first job was hanging in the air. She had never worked before, her parents supported her during her studies, and when we got married, I took over the responsibility. We talked about what to do next, and she asked me how I found my first job. It took me back, and I decided to share my story with her. I told her that my journey to employment wasn't exactly typical. I'd been working in the same company for years, and I got there thanks to a bit of luck and a friend. One day, I wrote an in-depth review of a technical product online. I laid out all the pros and cons as clearly as I could. As it turned out, my friend saw the post and thought it was impressive enough to show his boss. That same friend then suggested I join him at his company, and, surprisingly, they offered me a job after I met with the boss. Sometimes, it's just about being in the right place at the right time. My wife listened intently, and I could see her thinking it over. She smiled and said that maybe there was something to learn from my experience. She mentioned that she would start by putting her resume up on a few job sites, just to see if anything came her way. She also thought about reaching out to her friends and contacts, figuring that someone might know of an opportunity. I agreed that it was a smart idea and told her I'd also ask around my circle to see if anyone knew of any openings. Over the next few days, I did just that. I spoke with some of my friends, asked around at work, and checked if there were any opportunities that might suit her. Unfortunately, nothing really came up. It didn't surprise me much, though. These things take time, and good opportunities don't always just fall into your lap. I knew she would need patience. It's a process, after all. One day, she came home, and I could tell right away that something was different. She had a big smile on her face, the kind that lets you know something good happened before she even says a word. She told me that one of her best friend's acquaintances worked as an HR manager at a company, and, lucky for us, they were looking to fill a position that matched her specialty. I could see that she was excited, and I was genuinely happy for her. She explained that she had already arranged an interview for the next day. The opportunity seemed promising, and I could tell she was proud of taking the initiative. It's not always easy putting yourself out there, but she did it without hesitation, and I admired her for that. As we talked about the upcoming interview, she asked me a few questions: what to expect, how to prepare, and whether there was anything specific she should keep in mind. I gave her a few pointers, told her to stay confident, and reminded her to just be herself. I knew she could handle it, but sometimes, it's just about hearing the right words from someone you trust. Before she went off to get ready for her interview, I told her that if she needed anything, whether it was advice, help preparing, or even just a ride to the company, she should let me know. She nodded, still smiling, and I could see that spark of determination in her eyes. She was ready to face whatever came her way, and I was there to back her up however she needed. The next morning, I woke up to a loud clatter coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a pot had crashed to the floor, and before I could even get out of bed, I could hear my wife running around the house. She was clearly stressed out, talking loudly to herself about how she had no idea what to wear for her interview. I got up, took a moment to gather myself, and walked into the kitchen to see what was going on. She was in a bit of a frenzy, moving between the closet and the kitchen, holding up different outfits, and muttering about how nothing seemed right. It was clear that she was overthinking everything, which wasn't uncommon for big moments like this. I knew I had to step in and help her calm down a bit. That's when an idea struck me, a practical solution that might just make her feel more confident. I told her to call her friend. She looked at me, confused, and asked why. I explained that we were going to do something called an OSINT analysis. She gave me an even more puzzled look, asking what on earth that meant. I smiled and told her it was just a fancy way of saying that we were going to gather some information about her acquaintance, specifically, to find out what kind of style she liked. I figured if we knew her preferences, my wife could dress in a way that would immediately click with her interview. She hesitated for a moment, then agreed to go along with my plan. I took the lead, grabbed her phone, and dialed her friend. When she answered, I asked her about the interview, what her style was like, what kind of perfume she liked, anything that could help us prepare. Her friend was surprisingly helpful, sharing all sorts of details about her acquaintance's preferences. It seemed like she was more than happy to give us some insight. After hanging up, I turned to my wife and told her exactly what to do. I suggested she tie her hair up in a neat bun, wear a light summer dress, specifically the white one she had, and get ready quickly because we had one more stop to make before the interview. She looked at me with wide eyes, clearly surprised by the level of detail I had just provided. Then, she smiled and called me a genius. I just shrugged, I was just trying to help her get the job. Once she was dressed and ready, I told her we needed to head to the store. She gave me a puzzled look, but I explained that we were going to pick up the exact perfume that her friend had mentioned. We drove to the nearest department store, went straight to the fragrance section, and found the scent we needed. I helped her spray just the right amount, not too much, but enough to make an impression. She looked at me, still a bit in awe, and shook her head, calling me brilliant again. After we finished at the store, I drove her to the interview. I wished her good luck before she got out of the car, reminding her that she had everything she needed to succeed. She took a deep breath, smiled at me, and got out of the car, walking towards the building with confidence. I watched her go for a moment, knowing that she was ready, and then I drove back home. Later that evening, I started to wonder why she hadn't returned home yet. I knew interviews could sometimes take a while, but it was getting late, and I was beginning to get a bit curious. just as I was about to call her, my phone rang. It was her. She sounded excited, almost giddy, and told me to come meet her at the park. She said they were having a great time and that her acquaintance was just amazing. They had so much in common, and they were even talking about more personal topics. I asked her if they had been drinking, and she laughed, admitting that they had celebrated a bit. I figured I might as well head over there. I got up, grabbed my keys, and started getting ready to go meet them at the park. It sounded like they were having a good time, and I wanted to see how everything had gone for her. When I arrived at the park, I parked the car and made my way over to where they were sitting. From a distance, I could already see my wife and her new acquaintance laughing hysterically at something. It seemed like they were really enjoying themselves, and I noticed they had set up a little picnic. It was clear that they were having a good time, which made me feel relieved. I walked over to them, and my wife immediately introduced me to her acquaintance. The moment I approached, her acquaintance looked at me with a playful grin and said, "I bet you can't guess my name." I already knew it from what my wife's friend had told us earlier, so I confidently answered, and she looked genuinely surprised. We all laughed, and that broke the ice right away. It made the conversation flow more easily, and soon we were all chatting comfortably. As the evening went on, the acquaintance, whose name I now knew well, mentioned something unexpected. She said, "I have a terrible habit, and I might as well admit it now. I absolutely love to argue." She laughed as she said it, and I raised an eyebrow, curious. I asked her why she enjoyed it so much, and she explained that it was all about the thrill of competition for her. She said she just liked the challenge, the back and forth, it gave her a rush. She even tried to pull me into one of her little challenges right there and then. She said, "You know, I bet that in the first week at the office, some pudgy IT guy with relationship issues is going to fall head over heels for your wife." The way she said it caught me off guard, and I thought to myself that this was quite an odd thing to bring up. I kept my response straightforward, telling her that if anyone did fall for my wife and tried anything inappropriate, they might end up regretting it. I wasn't about to let anyone disrespect her. She rolled her eyes playfully and said she was just joking, that she thought I was strong enough to handle it. She then went on about how the guy she was referring to had been working at the office forever and was known for being a bit of a snitch, always running to management with whatever plans they had. She laughed it off, mentioning that she liked to keep things lively at work, and I started to get a clearer picture of her personality. She seemed like someone who enjoyed stirring things up, which made me think that she might not be the most stable influence. We ended up staying there for quite a while. They continued talking about all sorts of things, mostly about the workplace, people they knew, and the office culture. The acquaintance seemed to have plenty of stories about the office, most of them involving some kind of drama or trouble. My wife listened with interest, clearly entertained by it all, while I sat back and took it all in. I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about this person yet, but it was clear that my wife was enjoying herself, and that was what mattered at the moment. Eventually, it started getting late. My wife was visibly tired, and her speech was beginning to slur a bit. I decided it was time for us to head home. I stood up and offered my hand to help her up. She thanked the acquaintance for the company and the conversation, and I nodded politely in agreement. Despite my reservations about some of the things that had been said, it had been a decent enough evening overall. As we were getting ready to leave, the acquaintance waved enthusiastically and called out, "Don't forget, we're expecting you at work on Monday." She seemed genuinely excited for my wife to start, which was at least a positive sign. My wife smiled, clearly pleased, and I gave a quick nod before we finally made our way back to the car. It had been an interesting night, to say the least, and I hoped that whatever came next would be just as positive for her. We said our goodbyes, and the acquaintance continued to shout after us, reminding my wife that they were looking forward to seeing her at work on Monday. My wife waved back, and I helped her into the car, ready to head home after a long and somewhat surprising day. Once we got home, I helped my wife to bed since she was clearly exhausted from the long day. After making sure she was comfortable, I went to the living room, grabbed my phone, and called a few friends to talk about what had happened at the park. They were curious about the whole situation, especially about the new acquaintance. When I mentioned how lively she was and how much she liked to argue, one of my friends laughed and said, "Man, I wish I had a coworker like that. Sounds like she keeps things interesting." I couldn't help but share my own thoughts, though. I told them that I found her to be a bit too much, honestly. She seemed to be really into partying, and her attitude about work wasn't exactly what I would call professional. One of my friends, who had been through a tough divorce, chimed in and said I should keep an eye on things. He explained that a lot depends on the people you surround yourself with, and sometimes the wrong company can lead to bad decisions. I listened to what he had to say and nodded along. He was probably right, and it was something worth keeping in mind. After chatting with them for a while longer, I decided to call it a night. I went to bed, my mind still mulling over what my friends had said. It wasn't that I didn't trust my wife, I absolutely did. But I knew that people can be influenced by those around them, and her new acquaintance seemed like someone who could easily drag others into her chaotic lifestyle. Still, I didn't want to overthink it too much. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, hoping for the best. The next morning, I woke up before my wife and decided to make her some coffee. I knew she might have a bit of a headache from the previous night, and I wanted her to have a good start to the day. Once the coffee was ready, I brought it to her and asked her how the interview had gone. She smiled and told me that the acquaintance immediately complimented her perfume and her appearance. She said that, honestly, they didn't even discuss work much. Instead, they just chatted away, and before she knew it, the interview had turned into a casual conversation. I nodded and told her that it was great, she had made a good impression. Still, I couldn't help but mention that I found it a bit strange how much the acquaintance loved to argue, and how she seemed so eager to talk badly about others. Specifically, the way she talked about that guy from the office had rubbed me the wrong way. I reminded her about what my friend had said, how the people you spend time with can influence your behavior. I didn't want her to get caught up in anything that might lead to trouble. My wife listened patiently, but I could tell she didn't share my concerns. She said that, on the contrary, she found the acquaintance's outgoing nature to be refreshing. She explained that just because someone liked to party or have fun didn't mean they were a bad person. There were plenty of reasons why someone might cheat or make bad choices, but that didn't mean everyone who enjoyed themselves was like that. She assured me that she would never excuse someone for betraying their spouse, but she also didn't see any harm in spending time with someone who was a bit more adventurous. She then mentioned that she had already made plans to meet up with the acquaintance for coffee that day. It was Saturday, after all, and it seemed like a good chance for her to learn more about the role and her future responsibilities. She seemed genuinely excited about it, and I could tell she was eager to make a good impression at her new job. I hesitated for a moment, then told her that I still wasn't sure about this person. I suggested that she be careful, as I had a feeling that the acquaintance could potentially get her into some sort of trouble. My wife gave me a puzzled look, clearly not understanding why I was so concerned. She called me strange and reassured me that nothing bad was going to happen. She was confident that she could handle herself, and she didn't see any reason to worry. With that, she finished her coffee, got up, and left the house to go meet her new acquaintance. When my wife came back from her coffee meeting, she was beaming with excitement. She told me that it had gone incredibly well and that the acquaintance had given her a lot of helpful insights about how things would work at the company. She also mentioned, almost casually, that the acquaintance was actually dating one of the company's senior managers. It seemed that this connection had played a big part in helping her land the job. She reassured me that the responsibilities were nothing she couldn't handle and that it sounded like it would be a perfect fit for her. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, she told me more about her conversation. Apparently, the acquaintance had really gone out of her way to make my wife feel welcome, and they had talked about everything from office culture to the types of tasks she'd be handling. She seemed confident that it was going to be smooth sailing and that the job would be easy for her. Afterward, we both decided to call it a night, and I hoped that everything would go as well as she anticipated. After her first day at work, she came home absolutely thrilled. She told me that her new colleagues were fantastic, and she was already getting along well with everyone. She was especially happy to be in the same department as her acquaintance. They had quickly become close, which seemed to make my wife even more comfortable in her new role. She also mentioned that her acquaintance had organized a company event for the new hires and that it was going to be held in her honor. She seemed genuinely excited about it, which made me happy for her. She also told me that there were some secret traditions among the employees, things that they did to bond and build team spirit. I could tell that she was feeling welcomed and that she was fitting in well. It seemed like everything was off to a great start, and I was relieved to see her so enthusiastic about her new job. The excitement carried on over the next few days, and she spoke a lot about the fun activities and the overall camaraderie at the office. It was clear that she was enjoying herself, and that was all that mattered to me at the time. Eventually, the day of the company event arrived. That night, she came home very drunk. I wasn't particularly surprised. I knew that company parties could sometimes get out of hand, and I'd been to my share of events where people let loose a bit too much. She was cheerful, albeit a bit unsteady, and I helped her get to bed without saying much about it. I figured it was a one-time thing, and she would be back to her usual self the next day. But as the days turned into weeks, the parties and late nights started to become more frequent. It wasn't just the company event anymore, there were more and more get-togethers, and my wife began coming home late more often. It became almost routine. She would come in late, sometimes a little tipsy, and I would just try to brush it off. But after about a month of this, it was starting to wear on me. She seemed to have forgotten about the rest of our friends, spending almost all of her free time with her acquaintance and her co-workers. It felt like everything else had taken a back seat to her new social circle. One night, she came home late yet again, and I decided I had finally had enough. I told her that I was tired of this. She had been coming home late for weeks, and it seemed like she had completely abandoned her old friends. I tried to make her understand that I was worried about her, that this wasn't the kind of behavior I was used to from her. I told her that I didn't want her spending so much time with her acquaintance anymore, and I suggested that she take a step back from all the partying and late nights. My words didn't go over well. She immediately became defensive, and it quickly escalated into a full-blown argument. She accused me of being controlling and unreasonable, and I tried to explain that I was only looking out for her. But neither of us was really listening to the other. We were both too caught up in our own frustrations. The argument got louder, and soon we were both saying things that were more personal than they should have been. It was one of those fights where you cross lines you never intended to. Eventually, we both reached a point where we were just too exhausted to keep going. The shouting subsided, and there was nothing left to say. We both went to bed, still upset and without any real resolution. The next morning, we were both abruptly woken up by the sound of my wife's phone ringing. It was loud, persistent, and impossible to ignore. I glanced at the screen before she could get to it, and I saw that it was her acquaintance calling. My wife grabbed the phone, and as soon as she answered, I heard a shrill voice on the other end. Her acquaintance was crying, practically screaming into the phone about how her boyfriend, the senior manager, had broken up with her. She was furious and heartbroken, ranting about how all men were the same. My wife listened for a moment, then told her that she would come over right away. She hung up, turned to me, and gave me an apologetic look. While making herself a quick cup of coffee, she told me that she was really sorry for how things had been lately. She promised that she would start spending more time with me, but right now, her friend was in a bad place and needed her support. I didn't say much in response. I just nodded and watched as she got ready to leave. She left the house, promising to be back later in the evening. I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy about it all, but I knew that there was nothing I could do to stop her. She wanted to be there for her friend, and I could understand that. Still, I hoped that this wouldn't become yet another excuse for more late nights and more of the same behavior we had been dealing with lately. That evening, my wife finally returned home. She was clearly a little tipsy, and I could tell that the day had taken a toll on her. She sat down and started telling me about how long it had taken to calm her friend down. She seemed tired but still had that spark in her eyes that said she wasn't quite ready to call it a night. She mentioned that, at some point, they had ended up making another bet. I immediately asked her if this was the same secret bet she had talked about before. She shook her head and said that this was a different one. I asked her what it was about, and she hesitated, mumbling her response. Eventually, she explained that the bet was about proving themselves as strong and independent women. Her friend was determined to show everyone that she didn't need her ex, and now they had made a pact to do whatever it took to outshine the other teams at work. If their department, which was mostly women, could beat the productivity record of another department by the end of the month, her friend would supposedly never go back to that guy. If not, she would apologize and try to make amends with him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if she seriously thought this was a good idea. To me, it sounded ridiculous. Why would anyone make their personal relationships dependent on office productivity? My wife, though, was adamant. She said her friend was just really angry with men and wanted to prove a point. She wanted to show that she was better off without him, and my wife seemed determined to help her do that. I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around the situation. I told her bluntly that it all seemed pretty stupid to me. Making a bet like that, especially one involving work and personal relationships, just seemed like a recipe for disaster. She looked at me with frustration and defended her friend, insisting that she was just doing what she needed to do to move on. I could tell she wasn't going to change her mind about it, no matter what I said. The argument didn't go much further. She defended her friend, making it clear that she was going to stand by her, no matter how irrational I thought it all was. I realized that pushing the issue any further would only lead to more fighting, so I let it go. The tension slowly eased, and we both decided to move on from the topic. Eventually, we shifted to lighter conversation, and soon enough, we were getting ready for bed, both too tired to keep going with anything else. After that moment, things started to get even stranger. My wife began mentioning her acquaintance less and less. The stories about what was happening at work, the constant talk of office parties and gossip, all of it seemed to die down. It was almost as if the excitement had suddenly vanished. The house felt quieter, and the once lively recounts of her days had turned into simple, vague updates. I asked her about it one evening, wondering what had changed. She just shrugged and said that the mood at work wasn't the same anymore. The parties had slowed down, and everything had settled into a more stable routine. She sounded convincing, and I wanted to believe her, but there was still something that didn't sit right with me. Although the corporate events had apparently stopped, she still came home late from time to time. It wasn't as frequent as before, but it was still happening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I tried not to let my thoughts run wild, but a part of me just couldn't ignore the nagging sense that things were being hidden from me. One night, after yet another late return, I decided that I needed to get some answers. I waited until she had fallen asleep, and then I quietly went to where she kept her phone. I picked it up, but to my frustration, I found that there was now a password on it. It wasn't something she had done before, and it only made my suspicions grow. Why would she suddenly put a password on her phone if there was nothing to hide? I knew I needed to find a way to unlock it. I thought about it for a while and then remembered my friend who worked with phone repairs. People often came to him when they forgot their passwords or needed to unlock a phone for some other reason. I knew that, occasionally, his clients might have questionable reasons for needing help, like buying a stolen phone. But that wasn't my concern at the moment. I needed to find out what was on my wife's phone, and he was the only one I knew who could help. The next day, I decided to put my plan into motion. That evening, after dinner, I made sure her phone was charging in the living room. When we went to bed, she forgot it there, just as I had hoped. Once I was sure she was asleep, I quietly got up, went to the living room, and took the phone. I went down to the garage with it, grabbed a hammer, and gave the phone a light but deliberate hit, just enough to crack the screen without causing too much damage. Then, I turned it off and put it away. In the morning, I told her that I had heard some strange noise during the night. I said that I went to check it out, and in the process, I had accidentally knocked her phone off the table, causing it to break. She was understandably upset, but I quickly reassured her by suggesting that we go out right away to get her a new phone. I even insisted on covering the cost, which seemed to brighten her mood a bit. She agreed, and we got ready to head out. We went to the store, and I bought her a brand new phone. She seemed happy enough, and once we got home, she started setting it up while I made an excuse to leave for a bit. I told her that I needed to go to the gas station and take the car in for some maintenance. She didn't question it, and I could see she was preoccupied with her new device anyway. I put her broken phone in my bag, making sure it was well hidden, and left the house. As I drove off, I knew exactly where I was going. I was planning to head straight to my friend who did phone repairs. I needed him to help me unlock her old phone. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I felt like I had to know the truth, no matter what it might be. When I arrived at my friend's shop, I wasted no time explaining the entire situation to him. I told him about the password on my wife's phone, my suspicions, and my need to find out the truth. He listened without much reaction, nodding along as I spoke. He didn't seem too surprised. After all, he dealt with people trying to unlock phones for all sorts of reasons. Once I finished, he took the phone from me, looked at the cracked screen, and then nodded. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a cable and connected the phone to his computer. He opened up a program called John the Ripper. I asked him what it was, and he briefly explained that it was software designed to crack passwords. He told me that it would help bypass the limit on password attempts and brute force the code until it was unlocked. It sounded a bit extreme, but I was too deep in this to care. I needed answers, and I didn't have the luxury of worrying about the methods. So, we sat there, waiting as the program worked through every possible combination. It took about 30 minutes of watching numbers and letters scroll across the screen before we finally saw what we were looking for. The phone was unlocked. My heart was pounding as he handed it back to me. I took a deep breath and immediately started looking through her messages. The first thing I checked was her work chat, which was set to silent. That seemed odd in itself, so I opened it up and started scrolling through the conversation history. It didn't take long for me to come across something that made my stomach drop. There were messages between her co-workers referring to the black hole. At first, I thought it was some sort of inside joke, maybe something about a project or a team name. But as I read further, I realized it was a nickname they had given to my wife. They were talking about her, and the things they said were far from innocent. I kept reading, feeling a mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief. One of the messages talked about her smuggling champagne into an office party inside herself. I didn't want to believe what I was reading, but it was there, clear as day. Another message talked about how she had put on some kind of show during another event, involving the largest item in the office. The words were crude, and the more I read, the sicker I felt. She put this item inside herself. Then, the last string of messages hit me like a brick. During the last company event, she had apparently cheated on me with 6 different men. I couldn't even begin to process it. I just kept staring at the screen, hoping that somehow, I was misunderstanding everything. I kept scrolling, feeling numb, until I saw her acquaintance's nickname in the group. They called her Big Hole. The realization hit me that her friend wasn't much different from my wife. They were both involved in whatever this twisted game was. I decided to switch over to the private chat between my wife and her acquaintance. I needed to know what else was going on. As soon as I opened it, I saw something that made my blood boil. There was a counter in their conversation, 23 for my wife, 21 for her friend. It was a count of how many men they had each slept with. Suddenly, it all made sense. The bet they had talked about after that emotional morning, it wasn't about productivity or office success. It was about seeing who could sleep with more men. The whole thing was a lie. Her acquaintance hadn't even broken up with her boyfriend, they had just argued. Everything I thought I knew had been a facade, and I felt an overwhelming mix of betrayal, anger, and disgust. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed a plan. I kept digging through her phone, trying to find anything else that might help me understand the full scope of what was going on. That's when I found a contact labeled Work Nuisance. It seemed out of place, and I was curious, so I decided to call the number. When the person answered, I quickly introduced myself and explained the situation. I told him that I needed his help getting the messages I had found to the company leadership anonymously. To my surprise, he was more than willing to help. He said he was fed up with the drama and that he would gladly do anything to put an end to it. I thanked him and told him I owed him one. He laughed it off, saying that he'd be happy with a beer sometime. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of both dread and relief. I wasn't sure what the fallout from all this would be, but I knew I had to take action. I couldn't let this continue, and I needed to do what was right, not just for me, but for everyone else involved. I took a deep breath, pulled out my own phone, and started taking pictures of the incriminating conversations. Once I had everything documented, I tucked her phone back into my bag and got ready to head back home. When I got home that day, I acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. I didn't want to give anything away. I needed time to think, and I didn't want my wife to suspect anything before I was ready to take action. I knew I needed legal advice, so I messaged my friend and asked him for the contact information of the lawyer he had used during his divorce. He responded quickly, giving me the lawyer's number, and I saved it for the moment when I would need it. I knew that soon everything would come to light, and I needed to be prepared. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of my wife screaming. I rushed out of the bedroom, pretending to be concerned, and found her standing in the living room, holding her phone with tears streaming down her face. She looked at me, her face flushed with anger and shock, and yelled that she had been fired. Apparently, she had received a call from her manager, informing her that she was being let go due to inappropriate behavior. Someone had gone to the company leadership with information about her actions, and it had all come crashing down. She was in hysterics, shouting about how someone had set her up, how some snake had gone behind her back and lied to her boss. She kept repeating that none of it was true, that it was all a bunch of lies meant to ruin her. I stood there, watching her unravel, and I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. After everything I had read, after all the betrayal and lies, it felt like she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. I waited for a moment, letting her vent, before I calmly asked, "Is it not true?" She looked at me, stunned, as if she couldn't believe what I had just said. Her face twisted with rage, and she screamed at me, asking how I could even think that. How could I question her like that? That was when I decided to drop the act. I looked her in the eyes and told her that I knew everything. I told her that I had seen the messages, that I knew what she had been doing at work, and that I was the one who had sent the evidence to her boss. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, she erupted. She screamed at me, her face red with fury, demanding to know why I would do something like that. She called me every name in the book, accusing me of ruining her life, of destroying everything for no reason. But I stayed calm. I told her that she had brought this on herself, that she was the one who had betrayed me, who had lied and cheated. I told her that she deserved every bit of what was happening to her. There was no remorse in my voice, I meant every word. She tried to argue, to defend herself, but there was nothing she could say that would change what I had seen. The evidence was right there, in black and white, and no amount of screaming or crying was going to make me forget it. I turned away from her, walked to the bedroom, and started pulling her things out of the closet. I could hear her behind me, still yelling, but her words were starting to blur together. I was done listening to her excuses. I grabbed a suitcase from under the bed and started throwing her clothes into it. She followed me into the room, trying to stop me, but I pushed past her. I told her that she had to leave, that there was no place for her here anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. She tried to plead with me, her voice breaking, but I didn't waver. I had made up my mind, and there was no going back. Once I had packed up most of her things, I dragged the suitcase to the front door and opened it. I could feel her eyes on me, filled with a mix of anger and desperation, but I didn't look at her. I opened the door and tossed the suitcase out onto the front step. Then, I turned back to her and told her to get out. She stood there for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what was happening, but I didn't give her a chance to argue. I walked over to her, grabbed her arm, and led her to the door. She stumbled out onto the porch, still shouting at me, but I didn't respond. I picked up the rest of her things, threw them out after her, and then slammed the door shut. I locked it, stood there for a moment, and took a deep breath. It was over. She was gone. I knew there was still a long road ahead, the divorce, dealing with the aftermath, but for now, I had done what I needed to do. I had taken the first step towards moving on. After I had thrown her out, I spent some time walking through the house. It was eerily quiet, and I felt the emptiness of it all settling in. But I wasn't about to let my guard down. I knew that there might still be things left behind, things she might come back for, things that could cause more trouble if she managed to get her hands on them. I began searching through the rooms, opening drawers and closets, looking for anything that belonged to her that might be of value. Eventually, I stumbled upon a couple of hidden stashes. One was tucked away in the back of our shared closet, a small box with jewelry, a few cash envelopes, and some other personal items. Another stash was under the bed, filled with more of her jewelry. I knew that if she came back, she would be looking for these. I took everything and carried it out to the garage. I knew the garage was the one place she would never think to look. Even if she managed to break in, the last place she'd go was the cluttered, dusty space where I kept my tools and old equipment. Once I had hidden away her valuables, I turned my attention to my own finances. I couldn't afford to take any chances. I logged into my accounts and began transferring my money to my best friend's account. I trusted him, and I knew he would keep the funds safe for me. I sent him a message, letting him know what I had done, and asked him not to touch the money. I explained that it was my emergency stash, and that I was in the middle of a divorce. He understood and assured me that the money would be safe with him. I knew that the coming days would be difficult. I had seen enough people go through divorces to know that they could be messy, drawn-out affairs. I was preparing myself for whatever might come, and I knew that protecting my assets was the first step. My wife had already shown that she was willing to cross lines, and I had no doubt that she would come back for more if she thought she could get something out of it. I was determined not to let that happen. Later that night, I was sitting in the living room, trying to unwind, when I heard a loud crash. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately knew what had happened. I got up and walked towards the sound, and as I approached the front of the house, I saw that one of the windows had been shattered. My wife was there, trying to climb through the broken window. She was desperate, her face twisted with rage, her hands shaking as she tried to pull herself inside. I stood there for a moment, watching her struggle. She looked up and saw me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. She yelled at me, demanding to be let back inside. She was looking for her money, her jewelry, anything she could get her hands on. But I wasn't about to let her back in. I told her, firmly and calmly, that there was no place for her here anymore. I had made my decision, and nothing she said or did was going to change that. She continued to yell, her voice growing louder and more frantic. She was completely out of control, shouting obscenities, accusing me of stealing from her, calling me every name she could think of. But I stayed calm. I knew that getting angry wouldn't solve anything, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I simply stood there, watching her, waiting for her to tire herself out. It became clear that she wasn't going to stop. Her screaming was getting louder, and I knew that the neighbors would soon be concerned. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. When the operator answered, I explained the situation. My ex-wife had broken a window, was trying to force her way into my home, and was completely out of control. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched immediately. A few minutes later, the police arrived. They found her still standing at the broken window, still yelling, still trying to force her way inside. The officers approached her, speaking to her calmly, trying to de-escalate the situation. But she was beyond reason. She kept yelling, even as they tried to calm her down. Eventually, they had no choice but to take her into custody. They led her away, still screaming, her voice echoing down the street. I watched as they put her in the back of the patrol car. I stayed calm, feeling a strange sense of finality. It was over. She was gone, and I could finally begin to move on with my life. After some time, I managed to successfully finalize the divorce. The court ruled in my favor, allowing me to keep my savings and protect my assets. It was a relief, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that this chapter of my life was finally coming to an end. After everything that had happened, I knew I needed a break, some time to clear my head and figure out what to do next. I decided to take a week off and move back in with my parents for a while. I explained everything to them, and they welcomed me with open arms, offering me the support I needed. While staying with my parents, I took the opportunity to finalize my finances. I reached out to my friend, who had been holding my emergency funds, and transferred the money back into my account. With that settled, I started thinking about my next steps. I wanted a fresh start, a new place that wouldn't hold any memories of my previous life. I made the decision to sell the old house and look for a new one. It took some time, but eventually, I found the perfect place, a house that felt like it could be my new sanctuary. After selling the old house and moving into my new home, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in a long time. To celebrate the fresh start, I decided to throw a small party with some of my closest friends. It was a way to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company. It felt good to be surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could finally breathe again. A few days after the party, I was settling into my new routine when I heard an unexpected knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before going to answer it. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see my ex-wife standing there, along with her friend and the acquaintance who had been part of all the chaos. Without waiting for an invitation, they barged into my house, their expressions filled with anger and determination. They started rummaging through my things, opening cabinets and searching for something. I stood there for a moment, taken aback by their audacity. They were shouting at me, calling me names, accusing me of being a terrible person for kicking my ex-wife out. They claimed that I should have just accepted everything that had happened, that I should have been willing to wait for her while she enjoyed herself with other men. Their words were filled with venom, and it was clear that they had no intention of leaving peacefully. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I told them, firmly, that they needed to leave. I warned them that if they didn't, I would have no choice but to call the police. My ex-wife, fueled by anger, tried to push past me, her hand raised as if she was about to strike me. I reacted instinctively, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back, holding her in place. Her friend stood there, stunned, not sure what to do. I told them once again that they needed to leave, but they just stood there, too shocked to move. I knew that the situation was getting out of hand, and I needed to put an end to it before it escalated any further. I pulled out my phone and called the police, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. Within a few minutes, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. The officers arrived, and they quickly assessed the situation. My ex-wife was still struggling in my grip, and her friends were shouting, trying to make excuses for their actions. But the officers weren't interested in hearing their side of the story, they were here to restore order. The police took control, separating us and questioning everyone involved. It didn't take long for them to realize that my ex-wife and her friends were trespassing and causing a disturbance. The officers decided to take them into custody, leading them out of my house one by one. My ex-wife continued to shout, her voice filled with anger, but I just stood there, watching as they were escorted out. The officers assured me that they would handle the situation, and I thanked them for their help. Later on, I learned that my ex-wife and her friends were forced to pay a significant amount in damages and compensation for their actions that day. I could have pressed charges and taken things further, but I decided not to. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than it needed to be. Instead, I agreed to a financial settlement, and with that, I was finally able to put an end to this whole ordeal. The compensation was more than enough to cover the damages, and I was finally able to move on with my life, free from the chaos that had consumed it for so long.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Well, I'll be damned. It's Ryan Carter. Hey Ryan. Charlie called out, spotting me. How you been? Haven't seen you in ages. I nodded and gave him a small smile. Hi, Charlie. I've been good. Just busy, so I haven't been around much. But that's going to change. I'll be at Leo's a lot more often now. Charlie raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. What are you talking about? I pulled out a chair and sat at his table. Buy me a beer, and I'll tell you a story, I said with a grin. Once the beer was in front of me, I took a sip and started. You're not going to believe this, but something happened to me that I'd have bet good money against. I got scammed. I've always had my pick of the young ladies who come through Leo's, right? Well, I met one who stopped me dead in my tracks. She wasn't like the others. She grabbed my attention and made me give up every last one of them. She was in here about 4 months ago with several other ladies. I knew Julie, one of the girls sitting at the table, and walked over and said hello. I was hoping for an introduction to the woman that had caught my eye. I held up my empty bottle, and Charlie ordered another round. What was so special about this one? You've always pretty much had your choice of ladies, Charlie stated. I grabbed the beer as the waitress set it down. After drinking about half of it, I answered. She was tall, about 5 feet 9 inches, slender with that long auburn hair I like so much. Her blue eyes could just bore a hole through you if she wanted. I guess she wanted to get to know me because from the minute I sat down she never took her eyes off me. This should be my last beer, I thought. If I drink another one it will lead to an all-night binge. Her name was Lauren, I continued. We shook hands and I felt a spark or something. From that moment I was lost. It didn't matter how, I wanted this lady. Wait, you mean you fell for this Lauren right away? Charlie asked in disbelief. Yeah, I was hooked from the first minute. Sort of funny considering my experience, Anyway, I told her my name is Ryan Carter. Lauren said she knew because she'd asked Julie who I was. As I talked to Charlie, I thought about what happened after being introduced. Charlie's statement that I pretty much had my choice of the ladies was true. I'm 6 feet 2 inches with a muscular build from working construction. Tall enough that the ladies could wear heels, but not so tall that I towered over them. I've been told that I make an impression with my blonde hair and green eyes. More than one young lady has told me that I'm ruggedly good looking. I don't know about that, but I've never had much trouble attracting female companions. Personally, I think it's because I'm mostly Irish and have kissed the Blarney Stone. I seem to have a way with words and aren't afraid to approach women. Lauren and I talked most of the evening, dancing a few times and getting to know each other. I noticed she had a band of white skin around her ring finger. Picking up her hand, I pointed to the telltale signs of a recently removed ring. She sighed, took a deep breath and told me she and husband were sort of separated. At my questioning look, Lauren explained that they were going to get a divorce after the first of the year. They were waiting until then because of tax and financial reasons, but their marriage was over. I shrugged. His loss is my gain, I thought. Lauren wouldn't give me her phone number but did take my number. My marriage is over, but I don't want to rub his nose in it, she told me. Around midnight, she said she had to leave and that she'd call me. Over the weekend, I wished I would have pushed harder to get her number. I wanted to see her and spend more time with her. Monday evening, Lauren called. We made arrangements to meet at Leo's on Wednesday. I walked into the bar and Lauren waved me over to her booth. It was way in the back of the room and was about as private as you could get. She jumped up, hugged me and gave me a quick kiss. I've missed you and could hardly wait for tonight, she told me. She said she wanted to go somewhere more private and I suggested my apartment. I told her it was about 10 minutes away. We spent the better part of 3 hours trying to break my bed. Lauren was very adventurous, almost to the point of being freaky. Her attitude didn't bother me a bit. In my mind, there's always room for being freaky. The one thing that bothered me, the one thing I was disappointed about was that Lauren said she couldn't spend the night. She said she couldn't rub her soon-to-be ex-husband's face in the fact that she'd found a new man. Despite separate bedrooms, he still checked up on her from time to time. Lauren kissed me goodbye, saying she would meet me Friday evening at Leo's. Friday, it was the same story all over again. Lauren came back to my place and did her best to kill me with sex. If you have to go, that would be a finer way to go, I thought. I asked her to go to a dinner party with me on Saturday, but she said she and her parents already had plans. Again, she left to go home, telling me she'd call me about meeting next week. For the next 2 months, Lauren and I met on almost every Wednesday and several Fridays. Every time I suggested a different day, she had plans, either with her husband, her family, or friends from work. The first of the year came and went. I thought that the paperwork for her divorce would be started in January. March rolled around with no mention from Lauren about her divorce. When I questioned her about it, she said they'd have to wait until after filing the taxes for the previous year. We continued to meet at Leo's and most nights went back to my apartment. Just after April 1st, I asked Lauren to accompany me to a dinner party. I explained it was my dad's birthday party, and I wanted her to meet my family. She told me how sorry she was, but her mother was coming over to help her sort through the things Lauren wanted to take with her once she got divorced. I went to the party alone. As I started to leave, my brother Tom asked for a ride home. On the way, we decided to stop for a drink and went into a nice bar and grill called Charlie's. Sitting at the bar, I saw someone in the mirror behind the bar that shouldn't have been there. Lauren and a man were dancing on the small dance floor. She was totally engrossed in what he was saying. When she reached up and stroked his cheek, I knew she was engrossed with him too. I assumed that the man was her husband or maybe another friend with benefits. But I noticed that she had her wedding ring on. Motioning to the bartender, I told him I thought I knew the guy, but I wasn't sure. He told me that was Evan Samples and his wife Lauren. He said they were regulars and were in Charlie's almost every Saturday evening. I thanked him and said he wasn't the guy I knew. Tom saw the look on my face and asked what was wrong. I smiled ruefully and told him I just found out that I was being played. He looked around at Lauren and Evan. I told him I'd tell him about it when things were settled. He downed his drink and said we should leave. Tom said he really didn't want to go to jail that night. I smiled and walked out with him. I took a drink, stopped talking, and looked at Charlie. "Damn, that's a hell of a story," Charlie said. "You fell for this bitch?" I nodded and he asked, "What are you going to do?" "It's Saturday night, and if that bartender was right, Lauren and her husband will be at Charlie's tonight. Tom is going to meet me there in about an hour, and I'll have a talk with Lauren." "And her husband?" I replied in an angry voice. "You going to kick his butt?" "No, nothing like that. He hasn't done anything wrong. It's all on Lauren. Why does your brother need to be there? If I go alone, there might be trouble. If there are two of us, Evan might just listen to me instead of fighting." "I hope so," I said. "I'll go with you," Charlie offered. "I want to see the end to this story." I nodded, and we drove to Charlie's. My brother was sitting at the bar when we came in. Evan and Lauren were at the same table. I was worried about her seeing me before I could get close to her, but she had eyes only for her husband. I got a drink and walked toward the two sitting at the table, trailed by Tom and Charlie. When we got to the table, Lauren looked up and saw me. I always thought it was just a figure of speech that someone's face went white. Lauren's face went pasty white and her eyes opened wide. She didn't know what to do. "Hi, Lauren. Why don't you introduce me to your friend?" She was speechless, and when she did try to talk, she stammered and stuttered. Evan saw his wife's reaction and started to stand up. "Don't get up on my account," I said. "I'm Ryan Carter, a friend of Lauren's." Evan looked from Lauren to me and back again. Then he noticed Tom and Charlie as they stepped up beside me. "Look, Evan, I don't want any trouble. That's why these two are with me," I said, pointing to Tom and Charlie. "I've got a few things to say, and I'd like to do it without trouble if I can." "Okay." He nodded and sat back down. Evan wasn't really happy, but he seemed to be willing to listen to what I had to say. Turning to Lauren, I said, "Evan's a good-looking guy. He doesn't look anything at all like you described him. He's not fat, obese I think you called him, and he's not sweating like a pig. Doesn't dress like a slob either. Maybe I misunderstood you." I held up my hand to Evan as he started to interrupt. "A few more things, Evan, then I'll be done." "Okay." He hesitated and then nodded again. "I notice you're wearing your wedding ring this time, Lauren. What was it you told me?" "Oh yeah. You said you couldn't stand to wear it because it reminded you of your husband." "Ryan, please don't." Lauren started, but I spoke louder and kept talking. "I heard you tell Evan you loved him as I was walking over. Guess things at home must not be as bad as you told me. Last Saturday night in here, you were so tied up in Evan that you didn't notice me at the bar. Did you?" Lauren had tears running down her cheeks. She shook her head no at my question. "Evan, what does Lauren do on Wednesdays and Fridays? At least what does she tell you she's doing?" "Wednesdays she spends with her mother, and sometimes on Fridays she stops with her coworkers for dinner and drinks," he replied. Looking at Lauren, I could see the suspicion building in his eyes. "That's what she told you?" Not waiting for an answer, I said, "Several Fridays and almost every Wednesday for the last, 4 months? Lauren has come to my apartment and screwed my brains out." Evan's face turned red with anger, and he almost stood. Then he sort of fell back onto his chair. He looked at Lauren and then at me. He saw by the look on her face that I was telling the truth. "Why?" he asked. "Why did I tell you, or why did she do it?" "I can't answer for Lauren, but for 6 months, she's been telling me that you two were getting a divorce. That she was still with you for tax and financial reasons. Lauren said that she and I would be together when the divorce came through." I felt sorry for the guy. He was in love with a wife that was a side chick for another man. "Lauren, I didn't come over here to get back at you, or to get revenge. I came over here because Evan deserves to know what a bitch in 304 you are. He deserves to know before he invests any more time in you." Turning back to Evan, I said, I'm sorry you had to find out like this, but if it were me, I'd want to know what kind of woman she is. I'm sorry for my part in all of this. Motioning to Tom and Charlie, I turned and walked away. I looked back when I got to the door. Evan was talking heatedly to Lauren as she sat there and cried. Back at Leo's, Tom, Charlie, and I got a beer. Tapping his bottle against mine, Tom said, someone had to stop her, Ryan. If she hadn't have latched on to you, it would have been another guy. I'm proud of you. Looking at my brother, I shook my head. I'm so screwed, I said. What? Tom asked. Why would you say that? I'm still in love with the bitch, I replied. It's been 3 weeks to the day since I confronted Gilliam, Ryan Carter thought. Time to come back to life. I have to admit I was falling in love with the bitch. Although I felt good after outing her to her husband, Evan, I guess I still went into a funk. I remember that first week was the toughest. I mean, missing work and sitting home feeling hurt and sorry for myself. Going back to work the second week was the best thing I could have done. At least I didn't think about Gilliam for a few hours. You can't run heavy equipment with your mind on something else. This week has been the best so far, he thought. I realized that I was better off to be away from Lauren. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing would have blown up. Better to have happened now than later. If I'd been with her much longer, I would have really been in love. Hell with this, I said to myself. I'm going to Leo's for a beer or two. The first person I saw was my friend Charlie sitting at the bar drinking a beer. Good friend, I thought. He went with me to confront Lauren, and to protect my back in case Evan got bent out of shape. Charlie hadn't seen me yet, and I sort of snuck up behind him. Motioning to the barmaid, Tina, for 2 more beers, I tapped Charlie on his right shoulder. When he turned around to see who it was, I slipped into the bar stool on his left. He turned back and saw me and the fresh beer in front of him. Speak of the devil, Charlie said. I was just thinking about you. Yeah, well, here I am, I replied. At least what's left of me. Still hootin', huh? Not so much anymore. Think I'm about over with feeling sorry for myself. Touching bottles together, I said, here's to suckers everywhere, and may I never be one again. We finished our beer, and before I could order another round, Tina set 2 more in front of us. These 2 are on the house, she said. I gave her a questioning look. Thanks, but why? You deserve a break after what that bitch did, Tina replied. Yes, I know all about it. I knew about it while you were running with that bitch. Julie told me. She looked at me for a few seconds as if trying to decide something. Then she said, in fact, Julie set you up. Really? I asked. Yep. I didn't figure it was any of my business. I mean, you were running around with a married woman and all. Why would Julie do that? I thought we were friends, or at least not enemies. She told me that you were getting what you deserved after tossing her aside. Was the term she used? Tina paused and added, I didn't know the scam that Gilliam was pulling on you, though. She smiled, hence the free beer. Just don't expect any more. Okay. I never tossed Julie aside, I replied, defending myself. We went out 2 or 3 times, but she wanted a relationship leading to marriage, and I wasn't ready for that. In fact, she mentioned wanting to get married on our 3rd date, I explained. I told her then that I liked her, but I wasn't ready for that type of commitment. Taking a drink from my beer, I added, we kissed and hugged goodbye that night, and we didn't date again. I had no idea she was upset. I mean, she was always friendly when we ran into each other. I guess she wasn't as okay with your decision as you thought, Charlie said. Nodding at Tina, he ordered 2 more beers. Toasting Charlie with the new beer, I heard from behind me, Can I talk to you for a minute? Turning, I saw Lauren's husband, Evan, standing there. Behind him stood 2 really big dudes. What do you want, Evan? Outside if you're willing, he suggested. This needs to be a private conversation. I guess Evan wants some payback, I thought as I stood and nodded toward the back door. No need to break up, Leos. Charlie stood too and started to follow us. Stay here, Charlie. This is on me. You shouldn't get involved, I ordered. Turning to Tina, I said, give him another beer. I'll be right back. At least I hope so, I thought. Outside, behind the bar, I put the wall at my back and faced the 3 men. Evan stood about 6 feet away, flanked by his 2 friends. I knew I could take Evan, one-on-one. He was 6 feet 2 inches, just like me, but I outweighed him by maybe 15 pounds. He had blonde hair and light-colored eyes just like me, I thought. Maybe that was what attracted Lauren in the first place. Evan was in decent shape, but it was the gym type of shape. I knew he worked at a desk all day. I worked construction and my muscles were from hard work. I had no doubt that I could handle Evan. It was his 2 friends that were the problem. Bob and Sam, I found out their names later, were really big guys. They both topped 6 feet 6 inches and probably weighed 600 pounds between them. Really big. really mean-looking, and really seemed to be good friends with Evan. Okay, let's get this over with, I said, putting my hands up in a fighting stance. Get what over with? Evan asked. If you want a piece of me, then let's party, I replied. Evan smiled. You got it all wrong, Ryan. I just want to talk. Feeling foolish, I stood up straight and asked, about what? Looking at me as if I was brain dead, he asked, now what could we possibly have to talk about? He paused and said, Lauren and you, what about these two? I was still suspicious about his motive. Remember when you braced me at my table? I nodded. You had two guys with you because you wanted to talk to me and didn't want any trouble. Well, I brought Bob and Sam for the same reason. I came to talk to you and didn't want you going ballistic on me, Evan explained. Okay. I paused for a few seconds, relieved that I didn't have to dance with Bob and Sam. What do you want to know? Tell me about you and Lauren. Tell me about the whole thing. You sure you want to hear it? Evan nodded. Then I nodded. I met Lauren in Leo's one night. She was sitting with Julie, a girl that I knew. Lauren looked hot and I wanted to meet her. I paused to see how Evan took this. He didn't react, so I resumed talking. Julie introduced us and we hit it off. I've just found out that Julie set me up, but that's another story altogether. I stopped for a few seconds. Look, if we're not going to fight, let's go back inside and get a beer, I suggested. The four of us went back inside and sat at a booth in the back. It would give us some privacy. I motioned for a round from Tina, and Charlie brought them over and joined me. I made the introductions and Charlie sat up straight, pushed his chest out and tried to appear tough. Take it easy, Rambo, I told him. It's all good. Evan just wants to talk. Charlie slumped back into his seat, relieved that he didn't have to go up against Bob and Sam. Turning back to Evan, I explained about dating Lauren. I did get a little suspicious about only being able to see her on Wednesdays and Fridays. Looking at Evan, I weighed whether I should say any more. He could tell I was thinking about something and waited for me to continue. Oh, what the hell? I thought. Like I said, I was suspicious, but I accepted her reasoning. She said that though you guys were essentially separated, that she wouldn't feel right rubbing your nose in the fact that she'd moved on and found somebody else. Shaking my head, I said, what a crock. I thought she was being kind and considerate. Hesitating for a few seconds, I added, but the real reason I believed her was that I'd fallen in love with her. Evan was quiet for a minute after I finished. She's an easy one to love, he agreed. I trusted she was visiting her mother and going out with friends from work for the same reason. I loved her. So it's really none of my business, but where are you guys at now? It was morbid curiosity on my part. Evan gave me a small smile. For the last 3 weeks, things have been a little tense around our house. She's been apologizing and saying all the stuff you'd expect. You know, it was only a fling, it was only sex. I am the one she loves and you don't mean anything to her. He looked at me after saying that last part, then smiled and added, sorry, but that's what she said. I returned his grin. That's okay. I probably deserve that. I meant what I said that night. I'm sorry, and I didn't know she was playing me. I would have never been with her if I knew she was still married. Hope you guys can work through it and be happy. There's not a snowball's chance in hell of me getting through it, Evan said in a low voice. The bitch doesn't know it, but she's out the door as soon as I get home. I looked surprised because I thought he was talking to me for some kind of closure. He went on, I would have, gotten over a one-night stand. Too much alcohol, and letting herself go too far, I could have lived with. But I can't forgive or forget an ongoing, premeditated affair. The bitch is toast. Evan turned to Bob and Sam. You guys can go on home. Thanks for your help. I'm going to have one more drink with Ryan and then go throw her out the door. He ordered another round, but I opted for coffee. I've been drinking too much lately, and I don't want to spend another night wrapped around the porcelain throne, I explained with a grin. Yeah, know what you mean. I've had a few of those nights over the last 3 weeks. We talked again for about 5 to 10 minutes. When he stood to leave, he said, come out to my car. I've got something that belongs to you. I followed him to his car. He reached inside for something, turned and handed me one of my shirts. It had been washed, ironed, and was neatly folded. I think this is yours, Evan said. It was my shirt. Lauren had spilled something on her blouse at my house one evening. I put her blouse in the washing machine and then into the dryer. She didn't need it for the next hour or so anyway. The dryer didn't work for some reason, so I loaned her my shirt so she wouldn't have to wear her wet blouse home. Yeah, it's mine. I looked at the shirt and started to ask, do you know how? He interrupted me. Yes, she told me about it. By the way, I've got something else for you. I was looking down at my shirt and never saw the punch that knocked me on my butt. Evan looked down at me. I had to do that. If for no other reason but pride, I had to do that. Extending my hand, I motioned for Evan to help me up. On my feet, I said. I deserved that, I guess. I smiled at him and wiped the blood off my mouth. I owed you that one, but don't try it again. We shook hands. He got into his car and drove away. To throw the bitch to the curb, I guess. I went back into Leo's. Charlie was back at the bar, and I sat down next to him. I was rubbing my jaw when he looked over at me. Damn, what happened? A little payback, I guess you could call it, I replied. Tina walked over and asked, beer? Bourbon. Straight up, I answered. Then I'm going home. I've had enough fun for tonight. 2 weeks later, I was in Leo's for my usual Friday night visit. I would have a bourbon, then a beer, and switch to coffee or soda. The spell had been broken, and I was getting on with my life. I would meet some friends, maybe dance a little, and in general just have a good time. The big difference was that I didn't try to hook up with any of the lovelies I met. My heart just wasn't in it, I guess. Tina was on duty this evening, so I sat at the bar. Without my having to order, she brought over the first of the bourbons. You up to anything special tonight? She asked unexpectedly. I shook my head no, and she said, I get off in another hour and thought we might go get a bite or something. Looking at her, I saw a small grin. I said, you've never shown any interest before. In fact, you turned me down the 2 times I asked you for a date. Why the change of heart? I guess because of what happened with Lauren. I mean, how Julie set you up made me think, Tina replied. She told me after it was over that you didn't know the truth, that you didn't know that Lauren was just out for a little fun. So, I talked to a couple of girls that you've dated before and you received high marks from them. Pretty much all of them said you were a good guy. Funny, attentive, and honest about your intentions. She handed me a cup of coffee, replacing the bourbon I had downed when she first asked me out. You won't be needing a second bourbon, she said with a smirk. After I heard about you confronting Lauren and tipping off her husband about what was going on, I figured you deserved another chance. So, what do you say, big guy? I took a sip of the coffee and smiled. I think I'd better stay sober for our date, I replied. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I guess I've overcome what people like to call commitment issues. Looking back, I don't think I had a problem with commitment. I just hadn't met the right person yet. Until Tina. Now, here I stand, my brother Tom by my side, as I turn to watch Tina gracefully walking down the aisle in her wedding dress. Her smile radiates joy, and my chest tightens with emotion. Sometimes, doing the right thing leads the right thing straight to you. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.